Hey, what's up, live streamers? So we are going to the Chris Spangle Show feed, the We Are Libertarians feed. I'm always trying to experiment with this because I can. For Bob and Tom and for the Pat Down and for other places, I can't really experiment with their stuff, right? So I'm always with podcasting trying to figure out what works. Have had, with podcast movement, it became very clear that long episodes are not necessarily, it's a hindrance to growth because people see the long episode. And so I don't want to do long episodes. So we are going to, on Saturday mornings, keep doing these live streams, break our long-winded conversations into two parts, and make that the Monday and Tuesday show. So I'll explain a little bit more on the show, but you're going to see two shows, so don't be confused. You're watching the right thing. So that being said, let's get started.
All right, let's get back to some boring subjects.
Understand the risk to our country.
Freedom brings people together.
You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Learn more at wearelibertarians.com.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. My name is Chris Spangle. It's so great to be with you today. And we are going to be talking about Afghanistan. This was a fun show to prep. It's nice to get back into show prep this way it's like everybody went back to 2005 politics this week, and it just something felt so normal about it. So with that being said, we're going to break down what happened in Afghanistan after these words.
Warning. This show is for adults by semi-adults, so the language is sometimes strong and offensive.
I don't know what I said.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Our goal is to help you sound smarter while talking to your friends. If you struggle to understand politics, we explain it from an independent libertarian point of view. With all of the irreverence it deserves, we toss out the screaming heads, put people before political parties, and give context to the news to make you think. Now, here's our host, Chris Spangle, a 15-year veteran of politics and media.
Hey, welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. It is great to be with you. New day, new time, new experiments in action. And I know, listen, the Chris Spangle Show feed, I love podcasting. I've been doing this since 2007, and I love to experiment. This is my playground, the We Are Libertarians podcast network, where I test everything out, learn lots of things. And so, every 6 months, I do try to do 5 days a week, and then I kill myself. And then after a month or two, I swear I'll never do it again. But we are going to go through that cycle again. Thank you for joining me. And I know that consistency is the most important thing, and that is something that I often fail at in the Chris Spangle Show feed for a variety of reasons. But I want to, I'm doing the History of Modern Politics show. I'm doing the Liberty Explained show. I'm doing the Podcasting and Platform show. And then I do this show, right? Well, they're all me, right? And this is the Chris Spangle Show, so why not put those things in the feed? And so you hear them, because trust me, the numbers here versus the numbers there are much, much different. I was at Podcast Movement, and I figured out that, wow, 2-hour shows really do. I saw some numbers and the impact between am I going to listen to this new show? Because most people have between 7 and 10 shows on their podcast app, and you're fighting to be one of those 7. And the Chris Spangle Show is in that 7 for many of you, and we thank you so much. And for new people who don't give us a chance, that 2-hour mark often is a barrier. So we're going to continue to record on Saturdays, do 2 shows, split our normal show into 2 parts, and air that on Monday and Tuesday. And then Wednesday will be the podcasting show. And the goal of that is to help people build their own media company, build your own platform, start your own podcast. There's never been a better time to get started, launch something, get your voice out there, especially as social media goes away. So I want to teach people how to do what I've done here over the last, 10 years that We Are Libertarians and 20 years in radio and libertarianism. And then Thursday is our Liberty Explained show, where we solicit your questions. So make sure you send us questions at editor@wearelibertarians.com, and we'll answer those in a short little bit. And then the history segment will be on Fridays. So I'm going to interview a lot of cool professors. We had scheduled one person who I don't think is coming today. about the fall of Saigon. But we will have something on Friday that is history related. So gonna just try this out and see how it goes. I am dangerously close to being a full-time podcaster. And I think that if I am consistent and diligent with this schedule, then I can kind of get over that hump and basically make a living at this. And that is truly astounding to me. And I am so appreciative to the people who listen to our ads, the people who advertise, the people who are in our Patreon, and the people who buy my consulting for podcasting. I for the last year or so, really the last 3, have been on the side doing podcast consulting, helping people start podcasts, running podcasts, and all that income basically has given me a really good, I've been able to pay for a wedding. I've been able to pay for a ring, been able to pay down a lot of debt. And once I can be debt free, then I'm ready to go here. So, and that doesn't happen without our patrons. You know, I talked about it in our episode at the pool party, but the belief by our patrons, the people who subscribe to Wall Plus, in this network, in building this new institution, because like I always say, don't run for office. Start an institution, start a nonprofit, start a business. I've started a media company, and 50 years from now, when hopefully I'm still around, people will look back and it will be our patrons, the people who have really invested in the growth of this network, that have made that possible. And especially our $100 a month members, John Pusilo, Casey Feldposh, Lars Nordskog, Jake Edel, Matthew Durbin, Reinhold, Christy Avery, and Jason Doolittle. And I would not be able to build an institution without great friends and partners and people that, you know, are on this show week in, week out, that, you know, entertain you, and great co-hosts like Harry Price. Harry, thank you so much for being here. How has your week been?
It's been a whirlwind of a week. Like you said in the opening, it's like it's 2005 again. This is weird.
It is, right? Like, it's been so confusing because, Reinhold, everybody has political dysmorphia. They don't know where they stand anymore. The conservatives who are like arguing against themselves. Like, I've seen friends who were bloodthirsty neocons and were screaming at me in the 2000s about non-interventionism is terrorism in and of itself. And those people are like, well, why are we still there? Let's get out. Like, and then the Democrats, these Democratic friends that I had that were like, we need to pull out of the war. I'm anti-war. Now they're like, send in the troops. It's very, very confusing for people because this war has lasted so long that people's opinions on it have shifted to the other side.
Well, and it's not so much that they shifted. It's more a case of, I think a lot of times it's like, what are our enemies saying? And let's take that opposite position.
Right.
So as soon as the positions start to shift, everybody sees that and jumps the other way and tries to point out where the other people are wrong. So they paint themselves into these positions that are basically hypocritical on their own side, like their own, what they've said before. But it's, you know, everybody has short memories. So everybody just does what they want to do.
Yeah.
Well, you got into that by pointing out who voted for the war and who didn't. And some very,
it turns out that Barbara Lee was right.
People. Yeah. Some very dedicated people didn't like that you pointed that out, but
I unfollow my own posts, so I'm totally unaware what anybody said. But listen, when it comes to non-interventionism, my own personal history, it goes back to 2008 and the Ron Paul campaign in 2007. I think everybody was influenced by that. I was very libertarian while I was a Republican, and that was the one piece because, I turned 18 2 days before 9/11. It was a profoundly impactful day for me. It was, I think everybody at the time agreed that we should go into Afghanistan in one form or another. And it wasn't so much of what's going on with like the vaccine debate and the pandemic and the intensity of it and the social pressure. You know, if a lot of people are in the situation where if they get the vaccine, then their anti-vax family is going to disown them. And if they don't get it, the other side's going to disown them. You know, it's highly polarizing, and people kind of, it's incredibly, there's a lot of social engineering going on.
It's
And if you-
polarizing because people want it to be. That's how they're trying to make political gains, is by setting people at each other at an emotional level so that they don't have to think about it.
Yeah,
Right.
and so this is the only other time in my life where this aggressive feeling of social pressure, right, existed, was during that time period after 9/11. I mean, we you know, I think it was September 18th when the AUMF, the Authorization of Military Force Against Terrorism, was passed September 18th, you know, 7 days after. And only I think it was the Authorization for Military Force in Afghanistan. I'm don't want to say it was the same vote, but only Barbara Lee voted against it, a Democrat from California. Ron Paul voted for it, right? And that tells you, I think, how intense the pressure was at the time to go into Afghanistan. Now, long story short, you get to the debates and I see Ron Paul talking about non-interventionism, and it was incredibly impactful to me. It completely, I mean, I'm the guy who put together a pro-war rally, and I wonder if I have it publicly available. I don't think I have, because people who don't listen to this show, who have an opinion of me that is usually just it may be, let's see,
Just like that. Oh, is this the photo with you on stage with all the people around you? Oh,
yeah.
man.
Oh, I was kicking anti-war protesters off the stage. Yeah, it's unlisted. You guys can't see it unless I show it to you.
That's okay.
But yeah, I mean, I was very, very pro-war. Woo! Sorry, that's Shenandoah. This was the logo that we had designed for it. I was the College Republicans president at the time. And we were just trying to do something nice for the troops that were already in Afghanistan. Guy put together a video for it. You know, it was, let me turn this down here a little bit. You know, it was a pro-war rally, but it was a Thanksgiving for the troops. This is the day after Thanksgiving. It's a support rally on the Monument Circle in downtown Indy in 2003. Andy Horning spoke at it. Mentor of mine. Let me see if I can find my silly, goofy self. But you see, it was a big production. You know, mothers of the military.
You can see your head popping in the background.
You know, we had congressmen. That's Larry Borst, who was a state legislator. All the Republicans wanted to speak at it. We had Sammy Davis. Here's me.
Karen and Amy, I realized that this is more for the families who are here today. They sacrifice a lot. And none of us, if we don't have family in the military, can't understand the agony that they go through on a daily basis.
Look how fat I was.
I want to thank the Wright brothers for the fantastic music they're providing.
So it was a big production, you know, and it was. I'll put it in the show notes, the unlisted video, so you can watch it and check it out. And it was, I will say, I am very proud of it in the respect, in the way that Indianapolis was all lit up for Christmas at the time. We had taken these videos and put them on VHS tapes and DVDs and sent them to troops and care packages, you know, several hundred copies, and got many great letters from soldiers saying, you know, you have no idea how homesick I am and how great it was to like get to see the city at Christmas time, and we really appreciate it. So I am very proud of that, even if the sentiment behind it was mostly wrong. So yeah, well, Harry's right. Thank God you grew the beard. But you know, I mean, when you were in the military, Reinhold, I don't know if you were a non-interventionist at that point. Like after 9/11, it was very difficult not to want to go get the bastards, and whatever way we're going to do that, let's do it.
Right. So I was non-interventionist long before 9/11. I think I kind of,
as many soldiers are, the number one group of likes on our 100,000 person Facebook page is veterans.
Right. So, you know, I identified as a libertarian in like the early 90s. That's when I first heard about what libertarianism was. I realized, oh, that's what I think.
Did you stop?
You know? So, So I kind of had come to my own conclusion of what I remember saying to somebody. I said, I just want the government to leave everybody alone, just protect us from hurting each other, but otherwise leave us alone. And somebody said, "Oh, it sounds like libertarianism." So I went and looked it up, and that's kind of where I started my journey there. So I was doing political writing at the time, so I switched over and started doing more writing about libertarianism. During that period. So leading up to 9/11, I was very much anti, intervention. I remember the first Gulf War and how that came about and everything. So I was kind of against all that and some decisions that were made there. But I actually wrote an article defending 9/11 and the decision to go to Iraq. Right. And what was funny about the time too, is that I remember right after the attack and people were talking about what we're going to do, and Bush said he wanted to go to Afghanistan because that was where the Taliban ban was, and that's where all this was kind of developed from or planned from, and they were giving them protection. So let's go there and get those guys. And the Democrats at the time, one of the Democrat senators, and I don't remember the name, I need to go look it up, but he said that we're going to give him one. We'll give him one war. And so they all agreed to support the Afghanistan. So when he started to go to Iraq, of course, that's when the Democrats were like, "No, you can't go there." Yeah, right. So there was just as much justification. There was just as much justification to go to Iraq that there was Afghanistan. But it's the Democrats who said, "Nope, that's enough. We gave you one. You're not getting another one."
Yeah, I mean, Darla rightly says Biden voted for the war in Afghanistan as it was 98-0 and like 425-1 in the decision to go to Afghanistan. It was much more controversial to go to Iraq, but Biden voted for the war in Afghanistan, but said whenever we ended the Afghan war, it was going to end badly. So Biden voted for a war he always knew was going to end badly. He was head of the Council on Foreign Relations at that point. He was head of a Senate Armed Forces Committee at the time. Famously didn't really hold any hearings pushing back on the invasion of Afghanistan, but somewhere along the way became one of the more rabid anti-war Democrats. And if you read Barack Obama's autobiography, Ryan Lindsay told me this, I didn't read it, but it basically says, like, and I remember this at the time, like Biden and Obama were on the outs because Obama wanted to greatly escalate and have another surge in Afghanistan, and Biden was really against it. And Scott Horton gave a fantastic interview. It's in the show notes for this, talking about this interview and book. These burn pits. If you watch The Outpost, like if you're going to watch one movie, there's a couple movies. I recommended one that's like Brad Pitt, like War or some War's in the title, but it's on Netflix, and Brad Pitt plays this general, and it like shows the dysfunction of why this didn't work so well. But The Outpost shows what it's like for these soldiers in Afghanistan at the time. Fantastic movie, but they're burning feces, they're burning their trash. And one of the guys says, this is going to be the Agent Orange of this war. It's going to give us all cancer, burning all these polycarbonates and all this junk. And he was right. And Joe Biden's son was in Iraq around these burn pits, and that is what is believed to have given him the brain cancer that killed him. And so, when Joe Biden comes out this week and sounds like Ron Paul, I mean, listen to this. Let me pull it up here on the shared screen so the folks on YouTube can see it. When he says this, I mean, he sounds like Ron Paul in 2008.
How many more generations of America's daughters and sons would you have me send to fight Afghanistan's civil war when Afghan troops will not? How many more lives, American lives, is it worth? How many endless rows of headstones at Arlington National Cemetery? I'm clear on my answer. I will not repeat the mistakes we've made in the past.
I mean, he was so dead on with that. I mean, he was parts of that speech were really good.
How much is what happened to his son playing into that too? He's had to go through that grief, right? So he feels that like more on a personal level, because that's one of his big motivations in life is his family and his son. So, so I know that he had a big thing with Obama. They fought all the time about this. He wanted everybody out of Afghanistan, and everybody knew going in it was going to be bad. It wasn't just him. Everybody knew we were never going to get out clean, because we saw what happened to Russia when they did it. Why are we repeating that mistake? That was the big argument at the time, and they decided we were going to go do it.
Yeah, so
I think everybody was still flush a little bit from the first Gulf War about how easy that was, or seemed to be, because we were leading up to that war. It was the comments that Iraq has the 4th largest army. This is going to be a bloodbath. We're going to have a lot of debt, and then we just went in there and just steamrolled. Yeah, it was like 40 days or something like that. We bombed them so much that they were just giving up.
My fiance is 27. I'm 37. Nice. It is impossible for me to explain to her what life was like before 9/11 because she was 8. It is impossible for the 3 of us to explain to these kids what life was like before the war on terror, before PRISM, before taking your shoes off at the airport, before, it's the psychology before that was we were invincible. We defeated the Soviet Union. We had defeated Saddam Hussein in days. And then these hillbillies from Kabul or places we've never heard are going to come over here and blow up our towers. We're going to mop the floor with you. We're the sole superpower.
Just trying to tell people that our airports were more like malls here in America. Like you could, especially the Indianapolis one, it was basically part of this a Simon Mall. I remember going there as a teenager on the bus, get there, hang out at the airport, watch planes going off, and go to and shopping there.
Getting on the airplane was like getting on the airplane was like getting into the State Fair or a concert. Now you just walked through a metal detector. And when you went to the State Fair, you didn't have to go through a metal detector.
Yeah. And you didn't really have to at the airports when I was growing up. Right. So that's kind of a newer thing too. You used to be able to go to the actual gate and see people off.
Yeah.
You didn't have to have a ticket to get past a certain area. It was just a whole different time. I grew up at the end of the Vietnam War.
Damn.
And then it was just years and years of peace. And I remember when I was in the Navy that there was a big push by Reagan at the time to revamp our military, revamp our Navy, and make it stronger again, because we had kind of tailed off a little bit on building that part of the military branch up because we didn't need it. So that was kind of a big push at the time, but it was still less than what we saw. It was still a time of peace. It was still relatively peace. I mean, we still had these things happening, the coal and the Beirut and all that stuff was going on, but it was never, like a big war engagement like we have now. And it's just sad to see for 20 years just sitting there watching this happen. And people just don't remember what it was even like. So they're normal.
Yeah.
It's sad to me.
So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to give you kind of the lead up to the war in Afghanistan and kind of how we got into Afghanistan before we start talking about the Doha Agreement and everything that's happened this week. Welcome back to the Chris Spangle Show. We are talking about the before the Forever Wars. We're talking about how we got into Afghanistan. Trying to help you get the context. I know many of you, and when we had a live show on 9/11 years ago and Dakota was on, Dakota's in his early 20s still. That's how young he was. And he didn't even know. We asked, who attacked us on 9/11? And he goes, Saddam Hussein? Right? Like he didn't have any clue. He didn't even, people don't. Harry, your mic just gets like super loud sometimes. It's really weird.
Oh, I think hold on. I know what it is. I apologize. It's the dock. I apologize. Hold on.
Get your dock under control, man. So I don't think people have any idea what like the Taliban is or who they are or what happened. So we're going to kind of go through a little bit of history and kind of give you some understanding of the lead up to Afghanistan, what the war was like, why, what kind of happened. And then tomorrow we're going to go into what happened this past week and the failure that was this entire thing. So, the Taliban, and this is part of Wikipedia here. The Taliban, which refers to itself as the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, they're a militant organization that operates solely in Afghanistan. And they emerged in 1994, taking advantage of the power vacuum that was left following the aftermath of the Afghan Civil War. So the Soviet Union comes in and occupies Afghanistan. The Americans drew them into Afghanistan as a way to. So part of what Reagan's strategy was in defeating the Soviet Union was to get them to spend. So he increased military spending, increased all these actions around the world, trying to get us into kinetic warfare to draw in the Soviet Union, because basically to bankrupt them. And it worked, and they drew them into Afghanistan, and the army fighting the Soviets were funded by the Americans. Watch Charlie Wilson's war, and they funded the Mujahideen. One of the biggest backers and generals of the Mujahideen at the time in the 70s and 80s was Osama bin Laden, son of an oil billionaire, and they were fighting with American weapons against the Soviet Union. When they withdrew in the mid 80s, the Soviet Union collapsed 2 years later. And so then there's a fight. They just leave and the country collapses into a civil war. And the Taliban is a group that is kind of formed out of that, trying to take advantage of that power vacuum. And the group was mainly composed of Afghan religious students who studied Afghan madrasas as well as Pakistani madrasas during their time as refugees, and who had fought in the Soviet-Afghan War under the leadership of Muhammad Omar. Now, Al-Qaeda is different than the Taliban. They're not the same. Taliban operate, you have different groups. Afghanistan is a country, but it is not a country in the cohesive way that we think of, right? Like, Avon is next to Plainfield, is next to Brownsburg, which is next to Speedway, is next to Indianapolis, but we're all kind of the same, right? In Afghanistan, it's an incredibly mountainous country. You have tribes. For instance, when the Americans invaded in 2002, there are famous stories basically of soldiers going to tribal people and the tribal people think they're Russian, because they had not heard that 15 to 20 years earlier, the Russians had left. So they just assumed the Russians were still in the country and these Americans were Russians. Translators had a hard time because they were never, you'd have to know 25 different dialects for anybody to talk to each other. So it's it's a patchwork of tribal villages. It's not a cohesive country, which has been a big reason. But Al-Qaeda is an international terrorist group that was started by Osama bin Laden out of the Mujahideen, basically to fight the Americans, the American presence in Saudi Arabia specifically. So when Dennis and his friends go into Saudi Arabia, so when Saddam Hussein of Iraq invades Kuwait, which is this oil-rich country just south on the Saudi Arabian peninsula, Osama bin Laden goes to the emir of Saudi Arabia and says, let the Mujahideen fight, fund us. We know how to fight. We're well-trained. If you let the Americans in here, they will never leave. The 3 American bases that were set up after the Gulf War in 91 and 92 are still there. He was right. That's a major reason why he turned his sights towards the American government. And they had networks all through Africa and the Middle East and cells around the world. And The Looming Tower is a TV show that you can watch on Hulu that kind of breaks it down. The book by the same name is great. Ali Soufan is a great author on this. All those books and all that stuff's in the show notes and the PDF for you to check out. So, but Al Qaeda was able to host bases, training camps within Afghanistan. So, when the September 11 attacks happen under Bush, they go to the Taliban and say, hand over Osama bin Laden. And the Taliban, I mean, they're not just going to hand him over, right? They have deep ties and affiliations to Osama bin Laden, even if they are separate groups. They're not just going to hand him over to the United States. So they say, we want proof. And so that just ticked off George Bush. And this comes from Democracy Now! As they give a little bit of a brief history lesson as to what happened next.
Turn now to look at the roots of what's become America's longest war. The U.S. invaded Afghanistan October 7, 2001, less than a month after the al-Qaeda attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Within days of the U.S. bombing of Afghanistan, the Taliban offered to hand over Osama bin Laden, the al-Qaeda leader. But the Bush administration rejected any negotiations with the Taliban. This is Bush's press secretary, Ari Fleischer, responding to a question in October 2001.
Would you go so far as to say that no matter what the Taliban might say at this point, it may not make any difference? Are you ignoring whatever they may say?
The president could not have made it any clearer 2 weeks ago when he said that there will be no discussions and no negotiations. So what they say is not as important as what they do. And it's time for them to act. It's been time for them to act.
In December of 2001, just a month or two later, the Taliban offered to surrender control of Kandahar if its leader, Mullah Muhammad Omar, would be allowed to, quote, live in dignity in opposition custody. U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld rejected the offer.
If you're asking, would an arrangement with Omar where he could, quote, live in dignity in the Kandahar area or some place in Afghanistan be consistent with what I have said? The answer is no, it would not be consistent with what I have said.
That's Donald Rumsfeld speaking December 6, 2001.
So that leads America to invade with Operation Enduring Freedom. And then let's jump to Scott Horton, his book, Enough Already. And The Fool's Errand is the one to start with. And then Enough Already. Scott Horton is like the best on this stuff. He's followed this stuff forever. He's very meticulous in how he writes things. And I've never interviewed him because he's interviewed on every single libertarian podcast like every other week. But I'd love to talk to him but his best interview that I think he's ever done was just with Reason Magazine's Nick Gillespie. And it was really thorough and really worth your time listening to get a full perspective, not just on the history, but also what happened this week and what's going on with China and other global players. And definitely encourage you to go to antiwar.com, check out Scott Horton, go to the Libertarian Institute and listen to Scott Horton's podcast and just that one. Rest, avoid. No, foreign policy. What's the one that Trisha always recommends to me, guys? Foreign policy. I don't know. It's really good too. He does a good job. But Scott Horton, this is a little bit of a longer clip, but he gives kind of some more context to how why Osama bin Laden attacked us and what happened in the days following that.
Make about the reason, we have obviously the motive of al-Qaeda, who, came out of the Mujahideen that the Carter and Reagan administration had backed against the Soviets in Afghanistan in the 1980s. They were turned against us by the policies of Bush and Clinton in the 1990s, Bush Sr., and Bill Clinton in the 1990s, even though Bill Clinton kept backing them anyway, like in Chechnya and Kosovo. But then, they were turned against us, especially first and foremost, because of the American bases in Saudi Arabia being used to continue the blockade and the bombing against Iraq there. And that was the number one cause, and there are others. But anyway, but then
and just to put a point on that, that was when Bush said they hate us. George W. Bush said they hate us for our freedom. It was actually, plausible that Al-Qaeda hated us because we were, we had bases in Saudi Arabia.
Oh, sure. And in fact,
and elsewhere throughout the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing that you can do is just read Osama bin Laden's declarations of war from 1996 and 1998. The first one is called Declaration of War Against the Americans Occupying the Land of the Two Holy Places. Not subtle. And both of them. And then there's the letter to America that the Guardian published in early 2002 explains all this as well. That the motive, and in fact, there's a very authoritative source, especially for right-leaning national security type folk who might be listening to this, is the former chief of the CIA's bin Laden unit, Michael Scheuer, who's a very conservative guy and the former head bin Laden hunter at the CIA. And he said, look, these guys are religious radicals. Of course, they are the leaders of Al-Qaeda, but they don't hate us for who we are or because of who they are. They hate us because of what we do. And in fact, Scheuer's thing was, as a CIA analyst, he would be like a very objective, neutral reporter, and at least sometimes, and say, listen, if you still want to continue these policies, that's fine. This is a democracy. Talk about it, vote on it, keep the policies. All I'm saying is you need to understand these policies are what's driving the terrorists' war against us. Just simple as that. And very quickly, it's the bases in Saudi to bomb and blockade Iraq, support for Israel in their occupations of Palestine and at that time also of Lebanon, support for all the kings and dictators and sultans and El Presidentes of the region, pressure on them to keep oil prices artificially low to subsidize our economy at their expense. And then, as they accused, turning a blind eye to Russian, Chinese, Indian, and Uzbek oppression of Muslims, which, as I was saying before, isn't really true because Bill Clinton was backing the Mujahideen against the Russians in Chechnya and against their friends, the Serbs in Bosnia and in Kosovo. And he was also backing Uyghur fighters against China. So, in fact, after September 11th, Bill Clinton and two of his Democratic allies from the House, Brad Sherman and Tom Lantos, all three of them said something like, how could the Muslims attack us after everything that we've done for them lately? But the thing was, the 6 major reasons that they were targeting us were all still in play. And the fact that we had backed them in Kosovo did not bribe them off. But here's the real point. I'll try to wrap this up quick. Is that, so that's their motive. But the strategy was to bait America into making the same mistake that the Russians had made and invade Afghanistan, to bog us down, bleed us to bankruptcy, and force us out the long way and the hard way. This was the American deliberate policy against Russia. We'll give them their own Vietnam. That's not just in Rambo 3. That's Zbigniew Brzezinski, Walter Slocum, and Robert Gates in the Jimmy Carter years. So this is the reason we want to back the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, is to provoke the Russians into invading. Then we'll bog them down and give them their own Vietnam, just as we had just suffered through, and see how they like that. And then, of course, as we all know, the popular history is this is one of the straws that broke the camel's back and helped bring down the Soviet Union, along with the oil price crash of the late 1980s there. Well, the Mujahideen had learned that same lesson, including the Arab Afghan army had learned that same lesson as the Reaganites and said, yeah, we did that, right? And then they decided they're going to do the same thing to us again. And so when George Bush decided we're going to go to Afghanistan and stay, he was doing exactly what bin Laden wanted him to do. When then he went to and took out the socialist infidel, as bin Laden called him, Saddam Hussein in Baghdad, that was, as Michael Scheuer called it, a hoped for but unexpected gift to bin Laden, that he would turn Iraq, at least Western Iraq, became Jihadi University. Now then, if that's true, which it is, then when Obama went to Libya and then to Syria and helped even to inadvertently, they weren't really going for this, create the Islamic State Caliphate that ended up invading and taking control over all of Western Iraq from 2014 through 2017. This is all Osama bin Laden's wildest dreams. Remember in the Bush years, Glenn Beck would threaten us with the Islamo-fascist caliphate. But then you look at a map and you go, well, where is it? Because there's all nation states in the way. There's no caliphate. Well, Bush's Iraq war and Obama's Syria war created the caliphate of bin Laden's wildest dreams and Glenn Beck's nightmares. All of that is all, as they say in soccer, own goal, right? None of this had to happen at all.
Do,
So obviously you see solid interview there, great stuff. And so, you know, in the early weeks of the invasion of Afghanistan, I remember somebody was telling me they were in Afghanistan, they were a soldier, and they're like, we flew in with a bunch of F-16s, and Horton alludes to this in the first chapters of his book. Flew in there with our F-16s, blew up everything that was Al Qaeda, and we could have left. We could have walked away at that point. And you know, the numbers of Al Qaeda in Afghanistan went from thousands to like filling two school buses. So you have no real justification for that long-term nation building idea. And you have successive administrations like George Bush, you know, surges in Afghanistan, when Barack Obama, even though he runs on an anti-war platform, gets in and increases the amount of troops in Afghanistan. Trump, when he gets into office, it increases it to, I think it was 12,000, 15,000 troops in Afghanistan, drops the mother of all bombs. You know, so successive presidents kept trying to rebuild this country. And so you have basically, but there's one scene that just is perfect in capturing exactly why this project did not work, why we should not have been there for 19 years, because it was a fool's errand. And it's in Obama's War, a documentary by PBS and Frontline. And just watch these guys. You have basically two sides, young soldiers and tribesmen in Afghanistan, trying to communicate to each other to fulfill the needs or orders, basically, of the Taliban and the American military. And notice the general that talks in this. The guy that put this plan together, Michael Flynn, thinks Hillary Clinton eats babies. So obviously we weren't coming with our best. So check this out. This is from Frontline.
All the shooting makes it harder for the Marines and the people to trust one another.
All right. Well, I know there's no problems, but you're still going to see the Marines around here like every day, every other day.
And with a translator who doesn't speak the local dialect or English very well,
Say that over again.
the simplest communication seems impossible.
Haven't gone where during fighting? Haven't gone where during the fighting?
They haven't gone to, sir.
Gone where? You're not telling me where. Where have they gone?
They haven't gone to from here. They haven't
gone from where? Gone where from here? Where?
Frustration steadily grows.
So now it's over there. They just said it was over there.
Yeah.
The Marines are here to try to find out why some locals have moved out of their homes.
Why are people afraid to come back to their house?
So
now they can't come back. They know that.
So they fear fighting between the towns. So the villagers are basically saying we don't go to the other market because we don't want to get killed by the Taliban.
Right? People can start coming back. We want people to come back to their homes and start farming again. Hey, has anybody shopped at the market lately?
The villagers start laughing. We buy our flour from another bazaar. It's a faraway place.
They're going to Lockery.
Why are you going to Lockery? The market right here is open.
It's also Taliban told, if you go to bazaar, we will kill all of you.
So you were told the Taliban's going to shoot you if you go to the market. Who told you the Taliban was going to shoot you if you go to the market? Who told you all you'd be shot if you go to the market?
How well do you think your Marines understand counterinsurgency doctrine?
They understand how important it is to win the population. They understand that. It's sometimes difficult with the Marines to rein them back.
Now I'm going to ask this question for the 5th time. Hey, ask him to stop. Ask him to stop. I'm going to ask this question.
What I try to tell the Marines all the time is the guy that you are nice to today is going to be the guy that doesn't shoot at you or another Marine 2 rotations.
That's an on-the-ground commander.
They didn't answer my question. Listen to me for a second. Listen to me right now. All right? You all are not cooperating.
This is a war about personal relationships. It
This
has
is
to be
Flynn.
a cultural shift in how we think about what we're doing. This is how we will win this war. This is how we will succeed.
I need you all to answer my questions. If not, then I'm going to believe right now that the Taliban does come here, they talk to you, you talk to them, and you're still on their side. All right? You need to understand that we are here to keep the Taliban out.
Translator saying is, we're here to kick the Taliban out. Why aren't you helping us? They all start laughing and say, what can we do? What can we provide for you? You have planes and tanks and guns. We're simple people with nothing. We don't even have a sword. If you can't win, then how can we? So you've got these generals who, are in the Washington, D.C., like Flynn, saying, oh my, it's personal relationships that will win. And then you've got this 22, 23-year-old kid condescendingly talking down to these villagers, yelling at them, saying, we're here to help you. What do you want us to do? They're going to kill us if we help you. And so this is why, Reinhold, the Taliban, as of last year, they had 61% of the country. Even General Petraeus at one point says, yeah, the people on the ground prefer their sense of justice, their organization, than the completely corrupt government that we upheld. I mean, it's very clear what happened and why. And you see it in, and I'm going to find the name of that movie with Brad Pitt, because it's based on Stanley McChrystal and Michael Hastings, who died in that mysterious car accident. And he gave an interview in Rolling Stone. He was embedded with General McChrystal during this time period. And he basically, McChrystal was like, Obama doesn't know what he's doing. This is not working. He basically exposed to this reporter exactly what was said. And then they fired him for cursing. So they've justified a reason to fire McChrystal. And then the cycle just kept repeating. And the Afghan government was completely corrupt. You had Karzai, who had all kinds of Swiss bank accounts and just was funneling money. The military, towards the end of the collapse here, had ghost soldiers. So it's like in The Sopranos when they're doing no-bid jobs and hey, you need to give Paulie 3 employees on that construction site, fake names to pay so he can get 3 salaries from that job. That's what was happening over there. You had the heroin
money was going.
Right. Go ahead, Reinhold.
Well, that's where all our money was going. I remember the big days when they first had the vote for the government in Afghanistan. What was that? 2005, 2006, maybe, where they all had the blue finger. Remember?
Yep.
6.
And that was going to be the turning point. We were going to be able to get out of Afghanistan. They have their own government now. We've got Karzai's in place. He was elected. And then they just saw where they could make a bunch of money and suck America dry, because we were willing to do that. We were in we had gotten into a position where we couldn't just leave, because they would say, well, we wouldn't be able to defend ourselves against the Taliban. We don't have enough military might. We don't have enough manpower. We need to build that. So we just invested so many resources, not just the people that we were sending over there and getting killed and maimed and put in situations where they had so much stress, PTSD that or PTSD, where they were killing themselves. That's been a huge epidemic from this war.
It's been an enormous problem this week, right? Because you talk to friends who are soldiers and they're like, is my friend alive? Are they going to make it? They genuinely loved the people that were their translators or that helped them, fellow Afghan soldiers from the military. And they're now, in grave danger. And that's just been an added layer of trauma that probably could have been prevented if the exit had been done better,
differently.
Go ahead, Harry.
Yeah, I mean, differently. Even Biden himself, this was going to be chaotic, and everyone knows it was going to be chaotic. Everyone knew this was going to happen, but for some reason they couldn't foresee it to happen that quickly, and that you could have done different things to we're gonna. It was more of the planning, and you see a lot of the generals were we had different plans, and this is the plan they went with. But everyone knew this was eventually going to happen. China knew, everyone was knew eventually the Taliban was going to take back control of Afghanistan, but no one knew how fast and how chaotic it was going to be. And it's not even how you say, like, it's only that chaotic as people like may even make it out to be, even out right there on the floor. Like the Taliban is not really like right now, like just butchering people's, butchering people. They're more just telling you got to get the heck out. You need to leave.
Right.
Yeah.
And, well, the bad part is that I think a lot of their planning and thought process was under the impression that they just misunderstood what was going to happen, what the reaction to of the Afghan people is going to be, because they see the United States leaving, and I think the leadership and even the past administration felt the same way, probably, that once we leave, they'll be able to stand up for themselves, and they'll at least put up some sort of fight to keep their country. And they didn't. They just rolled over. And it's a lesson they did not learn from Vietnam, where the same thing happened, where as we started pulling out, a lot of the South Vietnamese military defected because they knew they were going to get overrun, and they wanted to be on the good side, the side that was going to win, because they didn't want to get tortured and killed for being part of the enemy. So we it was a great podcast yesterday from Bruce Carlson on the My History Can Beat Up Your Politics podcast, where he details some of that.
Who will be with us on Friday, by the way.
Right. And one of the great things that came out that I heard in that was one of the interesting things I heard about that was that they had planned to take off on planes out of Vietnam, and a defecting South Vietnamese officer or pilot dropped his payload on the runway and destroyed it as he was flying over to defect.
And he wanted to do
kept us.
He wanted to get in good with the people that were about to take over his country. They actually had Operation Baby Lift, they had Operation New Life, they had Operation Fresh Wind, they had multiple operations. But we're going to get into the fall of Saigon and the parallels there in an episode on Friday, and we're going to talk more about the disaster that was this past month in Afghanistan, and what are we to think about it, even though we are opposed to the long war, and we are opposed and we were for exiting Afghanistan. What happened? Could have been done differently? And we will talk about that tomorrow. So please stay tuned here on the Chris Spangle Show. Thank you for listening. And if you got some value out of this, please share it with your friends. We're not trying to make you mad. We're just trying to make you think here at the Chris Spangle Show. We'll see you tomorrow. Okay. All right. I had Bruce here. So Bruce is here now. So what I think we should do, out of respect for our guest, is do the Friday show, talk about the fall of Saigon, and then we'll do the other show after that. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
All right.
Hey, yeah, sorry, by the way, about all of a sudden the clock said 10. All of a sudden it said 10:45. I was like, oh God, Jeff,
it happens. I was telling these guys 20% of the time that's what happens. So thanks for joining us.
Sure. Yeah, I'm more of a taped guy too, so I don't have the discipline. I don't have that radio discipline anymore,
Yeah. Were you ever in radio? You have a great voice.
Yeah, I did. Believe it or not, I did a college radio, of course, for a long time, and then a stint on a country radio station in New Jersey. It doesn't exist anymore. It was an AM country station. It was great. Got the huge collection of records, and you got to pick out the records you wanted and talk about them and stuff.
Well, that's old school radio. Yeah.
Old school radio.
Yeah.
As long as every third song, we still had a little bit. This is like late 90s, a little bit of that, because every third song had to be programmed. You had to press the button, and it was like Shania Twain or something. But,
WKRP.
All right. So basically, there's just all these comparisons, and we wanted to talk about. I think a lot of people are like, I don't even know what Saigon is. Like we were talking about this last episode. Most people don't know what the Taliban is. Like one of our co-hosts on a 9/11 episode thought Saddam had bombed us. So we just wanted to give some context to that story in the news. And I'm a big fan of your show. Reinhold's fangirling right now. So we appreciate thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. Just some guy talking on a microphone. That's all. It has been 15 years, so I guess the number of years sort of has given me a bit of an education. I'm really glad to talk to you. Yeah, crazy time. So much going on, and the comparisons are there. So I really wanted to do a podcast, and I had done one recently on the comparisons itself. Right.
Right.
I think what's really going on here is you've sort of created an archetype of history, which is like, okay, there's a moment where U.S. troops leave, and how do you handle it? And you got, not surprisingly, there's like one party that's like, haha, we have our gotcha moment. We got them now.
Well, let me get rolling on the show here, and then I don't want to spoil it. So. Yeah. All right, ready?
Sure.
All right, let's get back to some boring subjects.
Understand the risk to our country.
All right, let's get back to some boring subjects.
Understand the risk to our country.
Freedom brings people together. You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Learn more at wearelibertarians.com.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. My name is Chris Spangle. It is great to have you here with us talking history. Friday is History Day here on the Chris Spangle Show. And we're very excited to have Bruce Carlson from My History Can Beat Up Your Politics. Great podcast that Reinhold and I listen to. I am a patron of it. So we wanted to give a little exposure and then also get you listening to his podcast, but also talk about the Saigon references between Afghanistan and this. So without further ado, please stay tuned right after these words.
Warning. This show is for adults by semi-adults, so the language is sometimes strong and offensive.
I don't know what I said.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Our goal is to help you sound smarter while talking to your friends. If you struggle to understand politics, we explain it from an independent, libertarian point of view. With all of the irreverence it deserves, we toss out the screaming heads, put people before political parties, and give context to the news to make you think. Now, here's our host, Chris Spangle, a 15-year veteran of politics and media.
Thank you for joining us here on the program today. It is great to be with you, and we have a special treat for you all as we start to dive into more history content. Bruce Carlson, who does the My History Can Beat Up Your Politics podcast over at, I think, Bruce, you just type that into your web address, right? Or you can search for it in any podcast app. Is it myhistorycanbeatupyourpolitics.com, which is very long.
It's going to be the only one that's going to come up on most searches.
Well, and then we've also got Harry, and Reinhold is smiling like a 3-year-old girl who just got a lollipop because he loves this podcast and is always talking about it. I think I was the one who recommended. I'm a big history fan, and I've listened to your podcast for many years. So it's great to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit about the show and what do you do there?
Sure. Thanks so much, Chris and Reinhold and Harry. It's great to be on here. And thanks for listening. My History Can Beat Up Your Politics is just that. We take history and use it to bring context to today's politics. And now we've been doing it. It is 15 years as of July. So I was podcasting when, you would say, there's my iPod. It looks like that, kind of thing. And I actually do miss those iPods.
It was funny because I was listening to your podcast yesterday, the one about Saigon that we're probably going to talk a little bit about here, but you replayed some audio from 2006 in there. And something you had done at the time, and you had to apologize for the mic quality before you played it.
It was, it was one of these where it was like that would pick up anything in the room, anything, including like dust moving through the air. It was a $10 Radio Shack, and I used to have to upload the episodes, I should say, overnight while I was sleeping because it would take about 3 hours on a phone line. I mean, it sounds like the 1800s, but we're talking about 2006, but that's where we were with podcasting, great stuff though. So good to be on, and happy to talk about Saigon and Kabul and all.
Yeah, I mean, your podcast, I think we have a similar podcast on the network that I host called The History of Modern Politics. It's a fundamentally different show in that we're doing like a full scale review of history and like where does politics kind of pop up? What are some parallels we can find? You do a lot more, random stuff. You do some series. What are some topics that you've enjoyed covering? Like if people are going to go back and look at your catalog, where should they start?
Yeah, we're getting close to 400 in the archive. I'm pretty sure I've done more podcasts than that, but they're not all, not all there or not all exist anymore. We did a whole series on President Reagan and really Ronald Reagan, his whole life, and talking about every aspect, called A Dozen Ronald Reagans, which looks at him from 12 different points of view, 12 different characteristics and descriptions you could make of Reagan, because I think he's a polarizing figure, right? So it's a great way to look at people's different politics. You have a very few cases where Reagan was to the left of some of the politics at the time and had to push something that liberals might be proud of today. Not too many times, but a few. In California, he came out in the mid 70s or in the late 70s, came out against an amendment that would have banned gay men and women from becoming teachers in the state of California. And Ronald Reagan's opposition was crucial to ending that amendment, and he got in a lot of trouble with the right for that. So we looked at things like that, and then of course we looked at all the different tax policies and defunding school student loans and some of the way that he ran for president and all of those issues. But in 12 issues, episodes, you can do an awful lot. We've also recently done one called The Ark of Commerce, which talks about, and that name comes from, as a double play on the fact that arks, these kind of wooden rafts, were first used to transport flour from the breadbasket of the nation in kind of mid to western Pennsylvania down to new markets in Baltimore, and to get around the Philadelphia merchants that were really choking them and charging high prices. And that's just one of many commerce stories that we told in the course of telling the history of American commerce. And we go through the sea commerce, we go through land commerce, we go through when governments stopped commerce, as they did during World War I, during the Wilson administration, and the suspension of railroad activity and really the control of the railroad completely by the United States government.
Now you're talking our language. Anti-Wilson, anti-government propaganda. When you and I have no idea what your political affiliation is, which is one thing that I really like about the show, is that you don't. I don't know if you're a Democrat or Republican. I have my suspicions, but I don't think you don't. It's not biased, right? Like you're not. Like
well, I think it's a great. I'm glad you're asking that, because I think it's a great point to make. I don't understand why people can't be objective, like when they have a political position. It seems like they probably in their own head are working all kinds of things out, and when they go out in the world, it's just one. They have to phrase, phrase everything in one position, as if they're like a talking spin monster. Maybe it's George Stephanopoulos who had us all talking like spin since the 90s or something. I'm pretty upfront on my show that I lean a little bit more left on things. I'm also, I would say I'm kind of, particularly on social issues, libertarian on some things, and some economic issues, particularly when you're talking about like small businesses and making things easier. Libertarian on some things. I could be considered conservative by some people who are very left of me, and things like that. But when we talk about politics and history, particularly when we talk about the history, we gotta be grown-ups, and we gotta shed some of that. There's a time for persuasion talk, and there's a time for analysis, and that's what I try to do. And it's not always easy. It's like working muscles. You got to make sure you get a rounded view of things. Like usually it's kind of like, well, I'm about to say this, but wait, what's the other side? What would someone come at me with? And then go and try to find some information and see what that point of view is. I wish I could think of a good example in the topic that we're going to talk about today. And I think that good example would be, Nixon gets a really bad rap, but is Nixon all bad? Were his actions that he took, for instance, in reaching out to China, extraordinary, probably impossible for another president to pull off, and really did lead to the end of the Vietnam War. So you got to look at certain things and not just be, not just take a whole position and just stick with one way, and looking at history tends to wear down too much too about how ideology, like how much you're really going to be, I kind of
the more I study history, the less I don't want to say ideological, less I care about the left right politics of whatever's on CNN that day. Like you are less concerned about some things and you're more concerned about other things than a lot of other people seem to be. So I'm going to ask one more question, then Reinhold gets a fangirl question, then we're going to go to Afghanistan, or Saigon, excuse me. When you thought about politics before this podcast, or how has your view changed, and how do you think, like Dan Carlin's political podcast, Common Sense, you listen to him, and a lot of what he says rings true to me because I'm more into history than I am politics these days. And you end up coming out with a weird, skewed view because you understand the past. Why do you think that is? Why is it important to understand the past, and how do you think we ought to apply that?
The past, it repeats itself, or as Mark Twain has been misquoted, it often rhymes. It is similar, and similar things happen all the time. What hasn't changed through human history? Biologists can tell us this thing is about the same, right? The technologies change. We have automobiles instead of horses. We have bicycles instead of horses and things like that. But the mind is we're similar material up there. You think that some certain political things like trying to run for president with the hope of becoming maybe selected for vice president never happened before. Political spin never happened before. Befriending reporters, starting your own newspaper that would be more aligned to your views. That's something that as soon as Zachary Taylor became president, they said, okay, here's what you got to do. You got to pick one of these newspapers. Probably the Washington Union is going to be your one, and that's going to be your newspaper that you're going to give the stories to. So these things happen over and over. So that's the first thing that that it takes some of the fire out of political debates when you know that things have happened before. It doesn't mean exactly before. There's no doubt when someone like Donald Trump ran for president, for instance, that's a very different thing. And the way he conducted himself in the office, those were very different things. It's not to say new things won't happen in history, but look at what happened, the result that political prognosticators could have predicted, which is he didn't win re-election. So you tried a bunch of different things, and that action set didn't get you that re-election. So you can be crazy, you can do different things. Nixon, like very much to this conversation, one of the things Nixon told Kissinger is, I'm going to be the madman. You let them know I'm crazy. I could do anything. I'll press this button tomorrow. You just let them know that. Let the Chinese know that. Let the North Vietnamese know that. That worked for 30 days or so. It was a nice new political trick, and it doesn't. So look, these things repeat over time. A certain way presidents and Congresses and foreign policy works. You don't get as excited. You also know that policies are going to work, and then they're going to have side effects. So I'm someone who would like people to get health care. How we do it is debatable. And I'm not so ideological anymore about like the how we do it on a lot of things, because you're looking in the past of history and seeing certain things that worked well and certain things that had additional problems down the line. Right. So that's why I think it's really important to look at the history. And I don't spend a lot of time on what it's particularly what like the columnist said this week.
There was somebody that I forget who it was, but they said that, it was Ryan Holiday, who's an author. He said, I've just stopped watching the news and I just read history books that are related to the news. And I learn way more about how people react than anything else. Like reading the book about the 1918 flu by John Barry at the beginning of this pandemic was fascinating because we've done everything that they did. We're the same people, no different.
Reinhold, San Francisco and the anti-maskers.
Exactly,
Yeah, and you did a show on that too, on the pandemic, and that was a very good one too. I guess my question is that what I really love about your podcast is that when you're telling these stories and you're talking about the history, you do it with stories, right? You tell a lot of like personal stories that happened during the time, and more from a point of view than just basic, here's the numbers, here's the facts, here's what happened, more academic based. And I think that really draws you into the mindset so that you can understand better on what's going on. Was that a conscious decision when you first started, or was that something that kind of developed over the 15 years that you've been doing this show?
I think it's instinct. I think it's a lot of the show writes itself still to this day. I probably have a little more strategy than I used to, and try to find things in the research phase that will be interesting to talk about. What's the strangest thing? And I always find it, because I think life is funny. Life is interesting. You could talk to your friends and have a bunch of stories about what happened to you, and they're different than someone just reporting on what a weekend should be like, an average weekend in America. And in history, it's the same. There's these crazy things that go on, like in the case of the Saigon. That was the first thing I pick up on. Like, whoa, that the secret code was when they needed to get out, they were going to play Bing Crosby's White Christmas. And, it's not unusual either. There's usually this life, and history's just recorded life. And it's our job, those of us who do it, to record, to do the playback, I guess, of the recording, to put it together well, to give you the best sense of what it was like at the time and what the attitudes were like at the time. The other way you're describing has never been much of my thought, although I might get into it in minute 30 or something like that, where you do that textbook way of things, which is like, by the way, even the textbook authors, if you start, or your history authors anymore, a lot of them are journalists. A lot of them are telling stories too, because this is the way people relate. I just don't think there's another way to do it than to, you don't always have to say, here's what, you are in a room and it's dark, and this is what living in a tenement might be. You can do some of that. It might get too much after a while, but you do have to tell the story of what it was like for that person or for those people during it. Yeah, not just talking about so much of that general stuff where it's like and then the Cold War began, and the United States and the USSR were pitted against each other, and there was a 10 to 15 year struggle while both sides mobilized, and they had this many forces and the other side had that many forces. Yeah, it's not useful. It's not real. And the other thing to always think about is there's stuff going on now, and there's stories being created. There's things going on in the Biden White House probably that we'll hear about later, and that's all we're trying to do on the show.
Well, you mentioned something too about always trying to find something unique or interesting about the story, and that's one thing I've always come away with when I listen to a show. There's always something in there I'm like, I didn't know that, or I hadn't heard that, and I'll go look it up because I'm fascinated at that point. You get me wanting to learn more about those topics.
And I'm a learner too. I don't know a lot about topics. Now I've done it for 15 years, so right, like anything, you pick things up, right? You remember things. But I have to say that I'm learning too. I don't know a lot. I do know about certain topics, but when I do that research round, and when you do it, you got to kind of do it fully before committing to, I'm going to write this down and start writing the script. And that's how you get objective too, because you got to start pulling in other information. Like, well, that's interesting, but what would my conservative listeners say about that?
Yeah, I try to do that a lot too, where you come up with a position, but then you have to go, what would the opposition to this position be, and go look and see what they say about it, and you have to research that and then combine it, and that's when you get to a more well-rounded opinion on things.
I think so.
So when we come back, we're going to jump into. Excuse me, sorry. Sometimes you pull that trigger too soon. Well, we're going to talk about Saigon and the parallels of Afghanistan and get into the story. So stay tuned right after these messages. Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us here on the We Are Libertarians Podcast Network. And we've got Bruce Carlson from My History Can Beat Up Your Politics. Make sure you check it out in your podcast feed. And everywhere, everybody is talking about the Saigon moment. And I don't think a lot of people actually know what Saigon is. So let's jump back into history and talk about the end of Vietnam. And let's see what lessons we might be able to learn from that. So, Bruce, help us set the scene for the Saigon moment. I was surprised when I was researching this that we had been out of active military fighting for 2 years at that point when Saigon fell.
That's right. The offensive operations stopped in January of 1973. The reality is Nixon's entire first term, he's pulling troops out. He pulls a lot of troops out. It's almost 100,000 out by the first year of his presidency. And Nixon would be seen forever as the great peacemaker if he didn't also simultaneously have this strategy of bombing as well.
In Cambodia and expanding to other countries. Yeah, that was the mystifying part about the Nixon story, because he's the guy that got us out, but he also expanded the war.
Welcome to history, right? It's like, it's that guy that you and I don't know that he's the man of the moment or anything like that. I actually believe that Lyndon Johnson was on the verge of a peace deal right towards the end of the election, that North Vietnam was ready because the previous bombing that Johnson had conducted in North Vietnam at that point had actually started to have some impact and got them to the peace table. And it was South Vietnam. And again, to your question, where is Saigon? I mean, North Vietnam, South Vietnam, Saigon's the capital of South Vietnam, Hanoi, the capital of North Vietnam at that time. South Vietnam is a country that's created after the French leave, and it's ostensibly democracy. The Americans have a lot of influence over it. But the real story that I don't think even a lot of people knew at the time is that while the Americans had a lot of influence in South Vietnam, and Kennedy actually allowed an operation that changed the government there violently, they didn't have total say, because on several occasions, South Vietnam, stopped peace treaties from happening, because they realized, I believe, that in the go round in 68, that was during the election. And we now know that there was some interference by the Nixon campaign, that members of the Nixon campaign got to members of the South Vietnam Senate and said, if you do this peace deal, they're going to destroy your country. By the time you get to 72, that's not the case anymore. It's just South Vietnam realizing that Nixon's, for lack of a better word, going to sell them out at the peace table, and they don't want to sign. And they're really forced to sign, and given some secret promise by Nixon that he'll continue to support them via the air, something that he doesn't have on paper and doesn't have congressional approval for directly.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that happened in Afghanistan as well. Peace summits have been taking place since, for almost, over a decade. And the people who run the Afghan government now don't want to give this up, because then all the money that they're collecting in their Swiss bank accounts get shut off. So when the Doha agreements take place last year, when Trump is trying to negotiate with the Taliban, they're like, the Afghan government's like, we're not going to abide by this. We're not going to do this. We can't, they can't, you're a puppet government. Yes, they can, so it's interesting, that parallel. So, the North Vietnamese are aligned with the communists, the South Vietnamese aligned with South Vietnam. And there are a lot of parallels in that corruption in the South Vietnamese government, are there not? It was a fairly corrupt government that we had propped up that really hurt our credibility with the people of South Vietnam.
Yeah, I mean, the United States instituted the president and the assassination of the previous president because we weren't, it didn't look like we could deal with the previous government. I don't think it was a shining democracy, no, by any means. It was pretty obvious what was going on there and obvious to people. And there's a lot more popular support for the communist government north. Whether they really knew what it was going to be like later or not, you could argue that, but there was more popular support. They were gaining more recruits. It was easier for them to build an army of people, whereas for South Vietnam, they needed American support to even keep it a country. And what you really see in the process of the peace negotiation through Nixon's first term, it's almost like negotiating with yourself or negotiating with your politics. You know, Nixon wants out to achieve a campaign promise, to eliminate a campaign problem that he's running up against McGovern, who's got, you have the 26th Amendment passed. Nixon thinks it's going to be a good thing for him. He's always supported it, but now he's got an opponent that's got young people riled up, McGovern, and the Vietnam War is Nixon's worst issue. He needs to do something. He also made a campaign promise to end the war with honor. Those two last words, with honor, as opposed to any other way of ending the war, in my opinion, led to about 4 more years of additional casualties and probably 20,000 on his side of the Vietnam War. And then basically a war that now lasted through 2 presidents, really 4 presidents, but two presidents during the height of it and 2 parties. And that whole period, he's trying to get deals. He tries the madman theory where it's like, I might be crazy. He tries bombing the supply lines in Laos and Cambodia because he's seeing that that's how they're getting supplies, and he wants to deal with it. There's also a memo that we now know of called the Zilch memo, which Butterfield, who is the man who revealed the tapes during Watergate, the assistant deputy chief of staff under Haldeman, revealed that there's this memo where Nixon basically said, you know, the bombing doesn't do anything militarily, but every time I do it, I go up in the polls, particularly in the Republican Party, and particularly with people like Wallace voters that he's concerned about in that side. So we have that memo. We also incidentally have phone calls from Lyndon Johnson of very similar nature, like, I'm not winning. We're not winning here. I can go out and whatever you're hearing me go out and say, we're not winning, and this is impossible. So we have both presidents kind of on the record, one way or the other. That
even Kennedy in the beginning. I mean, there's in the Vietnam Ken Burns documentary, he's like, "This is going to be a total waste of time." I mean,
Kennedy,
at the very beginning, he says it.
Yeah. Oh well, Kennedy, I believe, even as a senator, cast doubt on even the French situation and whether we should help them, and was always a bit skeptical about the situation in Vietnam and whether a large American troop presence would be effective.
I think at one point he went to Vietnam and he said something along those lines, and it was kind of a little controversial when he was
before he was president. Yeah.
So let's jump forward. I mean, if you're looking at Afghanistan, you know, we stopped operations in 2014 under Obama, but you still have troops there, and the troop deaths, which to me are the only metric that matters. The number you want is 0, which is why we're withdrawing now. But it's been, you know, 5, 15, 20 per year since then. But you have like the handful of advisors who are kind of propping up this army, propping up this government, and withdrawing them. Just now, most people don't understand that the Taliban operated 60% of the country. When we look back at Vietnam and we're talking about that I don't know what you call it, interregnum between the stopping of operations and the fall of Saigon, which is just the complete withdrawal. You know, is it clear? Is it as clear in Vietnam that when we leave, that it's just going to be a complete toppling? And
absolutely clear in my opinion, but also there's evidence in the tapes between Nixon and Kissinger now that have come out later where Kissinger basically admits that all they were looking for in this peace process at that point is not a win where there's going to be a South Vietnam forever. It's a decent interval where it's going to essentially look good, that it's not going to collapse the next day. So you have a very similar situation because the resulting agreement that ends the Vietnam War, ends America's part in the Vietnam War, you know, really the obligations are all on us. There is a stipulation that there'll be no foreign equipment sent in except for replacements. So that applies to us and the Soviet Union and China that were supplying North Vietnam. When we were getting pounded, we would get pounded by Soviet artillery and Soviet planes and things like that. But the one who has to withdraw is the United States. So North Vietnamese troops that are in South Vietnam do not have to leave as a result of this agreement. And this is what Nixon and Kissinger sign off on. He wants a deal. There's no other way to look at it. He wants a deal before that election. He wanted it, I think, even earlier, but they were he was I think some of the bombing was he thought might be effective, and they were also delaying a bit again at the peace table, and so Kissinger couldn't get to a peace deal immediately. But right before the election, they were eager to sign. And they convinced South Vietnam to go along by just saying that, a kind of secret commitment between Nixon and the president of South Vietnam that I will send in air power where needed. The agreement does allow the United States to replace. So if South Vietnam loses a tank, the United States can replace that tank. But that's really cool comfort to somebody that has enemy troops in their nation.
Yeah, one thing that I was surprised by in your episode, and Reinhold referenced it, was the amount of plans that were in place. And this is where like Biden gets no pass. There seems to be no plans, and a lot of that goes on the military too. I mean, the military and Trump were never in step. Biden and the military, in some respects, have not been in step on this. They don't want to leave, and so they've just sort of, in my opinion, disobeyed the commander in chief and not prepared. But so looking at the fall of Saigon on Wikipedia, on April 3rd, Ford announced Operation Baby Lift and evacuated 2,000 orphans. And then over 25 orphans were evacuated. Operation New Life resulted in the evacuation of over 110,000 Vietnamese refugees. The final evacuation was Operation Frequent Wind, which resulted in 7,000 people being evacuated. Frequent Wind is the photos of people climbing up the famous stairs that's in the Ford Museum now as they're trying to cling onto helicopters, and some of these photos are really striking. But Operation Wind is what we all know. And there were multiple plans that were in place. And while you're talking, I'm going to pop up, one of those photos just so people can kind of see the parallels. So please don't be distracted by that.
No.
But I think the parallels between these two, the parallels are image. They're not planning.
That's it. It's very much true. In other words, that look, there's a certain situation where there's going to be a limit to who you can take out. We can't bring the entire nation of South Vietnam and make them United States citizens. It was the largest almost in the end, when you count the operations you mentioned, and then plus the self-evacuees who got on ships in the Saigon River and got to Manila, you're talking about almost 140,000 people, who a lot of them became United States citizens, and there was a specific congressional act dedicated to helping them. But yeah, I mean, you see these terrible images, and there's people trying to be that additional one getting on the helicopter, and what you can't understand is that what you can't understand is that it could be
he's having a little mic trouble here, it sounds like. Oh darn. Yeah, he's
I'll be right back.
I'm narrating his your wife just popped in, or I assume your wife, excuse me for assuming your status, but
sorry about that podcast today. No, you were right. We could say broadcast assistant, but why use euphemisms? You know how it is with the everyone's at home these days. Still a little bit of that going on, even though we're outside a little. So anyway,
my associate producer pops in all the time. I totally get it.
But the main thing you mentioned it was an image. And I think that's so important, is that, so when I did the podcast episode on this, what I actually did is a podcast episode on the archetype that's been created, which is when the U.S. leaves a place, and how eager people are to say, like, hey, this is Biden's Saigon. You created this image. Okay. But have you done the history? Have you investigated the image? And when you look at that operation, it's not only wrong, it's kind of an insult to the Marines on the ground to say that it was a failure. That day, April 29th, going into April 30th, not a failure. Biggest helicopter evacuation ever. Got 7,000 people. See, it was supposed to be more. It was supposed to be a plane evacuation. And what happened was there is a pilot that defected and bombed the runway. They could not use the airport. The ambassador, Graham Martin, goes to see it with his own eyes. You can't believe it. It's Murphy's Law. And they have to now get everybody from the airport where the defense attaché office is and get them to the embassy. That embassy where you see a lot of those last images, never supposed to be the spot that the evacuation was going to occur from. That was the backup plan. And still they were able to get almost 7,000 or more than 7,000 people between, say, noon of April 29th and President Ford did a hard stop at 3 a.m, April 30th. And then the last Marines got out at 7:45 in the morning, April 30th. Very successful. Unfortunately, there were still hundreds of people who we had promised to get out, even under the revised helicopter plan, who were on the embassy grounds. And then a lot more who came over the gates who didn't have that authorization, we couldn't get out. So sure, it's a failure and in that way, but overall, it's one of a successful operation. It's just that it became a symbol. When you see those images, it's a symbol of what is a larger failure, the involvement in Vietnam, the attempt to prop up South Vietnam over that period of time.
Yeah, there was then, and Kissinger wanted to go. People wanted to go back in the administration. I think Ford wanted to go back, and then Kissinger didn't want them to go back in to get more people because it would be personally embarrassing to him. Kissinger. But
I think it would have been difficult. Any use of force additionally in Vietnam. You're talking about the last thing, and this hasn't changed, right? The last thing anyone wants to do now. They can talk about Biden. You can talk about how bad the evacuation was. You can talk about overall, and we left the Taliban in charge. I mean, we technically originally weren't really trying to fight the.
He popped off there. Yeah, it is fascinating how, and I think it was a major, Reinhold or Harry, like a major blow to the psyche of Americans, especially since you're talking about in Vietnam, a generation, the greatest fighting force in American history that won World War II, and then you have this blow where you've lost the war and you have these horrible pictures. And I apologize, my screen share is not working, but yeah, I mean, talk about that.
Well, yeah. And go ahead. I was going to say, and then you've had all these news hosts that are making the Saigon reference, but they're young, just like myself is like, okay, we didn't experience that on TV. We all had to go back and research and find out what the heck is going on. And then when you said so, and that war, also the war effort, you also started wondering like how much is all of this is of just generals or different officers at the time wanting to get things different done just before to make rank, because they know okay, this is could be my last time to make rank. This could be my last deployment, is my last thing. I need to do this to get rank. And so they something just got pulled up and pulled on, and dragged on for longer times. But but the whole getting ready for the show, it I think it was what I figured when you posted when we were talking about, we were doing second, I remember the exact day, but I kept hearing it on the radio, and you go okay, I'm way too young. Let me look this up. And I'm like, oh man, no, they're wrong. This is not even close.
It's not close. I mean, Bruce, they had booklets.
Right. But the imagery in your head is that elevator is the stair seat. That's all you have is that imagery when you're young. It's
I'm gonna pop out to restart my browser so I can show you guys this thing. I got I reset my computer, so it's all messed up. But yeah, I mean, the imagery is the only close thing. But Bruce, talk about the booklets that they had and Bing Crosby and that shows you they had a printer print things and pass it out. There were code words. That's how prepared they were for this stuff.
Right. They had a safe booklet which went to the people that they were designated that they could go. And these were usually people with some involvement in the South Vietnamese government, although I presume there were some people that were simply connected to American business and things like that went on. A little bit of speculation, but let's just say the upper middle class in a lot of cases, and people who worked for the U.S. government or helped the U.S. government, who both we owed something to and also would be targeted. They got a booklet. It said there were 13 locations throughout Saigon. So when you see that image of the helicopter that you most commonly see, that's not the embassy. If it's the bigger helicopter, it is. If it's the little Huey, that's not the last flight out of Saigon. It just shows you that now we love these videos. Then they love these. Then they love these still images, and you still see the effect of an image like that. And it's I don't know all the planning that went on during this one. It is true that even with the planning in Saigon, a lot of people found out that, hey, we're going to play Bing Crosby. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. And that means get the heck out of Saigon and get on those copters and get out, to the people that need to know that. And there were some like Japanese officials and South Korean officials that were in South Vietnam that didn't get out timely because they didn't know that music and didn't get the signal and things. All those kind of things went on. But what I'm saying, we still got a heck of a lot of people out in Saigon, and the Marines on the ground have never considered that a failure. President Ford didn't consider it a failure. He did authorize that a hard stop at 3:45 and no more, even if there were people waiting, that we had to get our Marines out. And he did have to end that.
Was that because they had to stop because the troops from the offensive from the North Vietnamese were just getting so close they didn't want to get involved in a firefight?
Yeah, and the way that it's interesting, which is also a little similar to, very similar to Kabul, the way that the Marines described it, some of them, is that they let us out. Like what they were doing was, we're going to give you enough ground fire. We're going to make it clear we're doing this. And the actions at the airport, for instance, are a sign like, we're coming in. You can't stay here any longer, United States. You need to get out. But they did not want an open firefight between North Vietnam and the United States in the streets of Saigon at that particular moment when offensive actions had stopped in 73. But it was a kind of like, how gentle can a guerrilla army be, right? It's not gentle. They're going to start firing on the ground and letting you know we're moving in. Tanks started arriving. We're not going to let you stay any longer. We're putting the pressure on. And that was coming. They could have done more at the airport, for instance. They did end up killing 2 Marines that day. A lot of the Marines on the ground said they could have done a lot more if they had wanted to, but what they were just doing was enough to say, get the heck out. We're coming in. And everything's going to, similar thing too. Everything's going to be great too. We're going to be reunited as a country. Why do you want to separate us?
So what ended up happening was there a humanitarian crisis? Were there slaughters? Like what happened when they took over the country?
There was a lot of that. I don't have as good detail on it, but it was I know that many of the people that were South Vietnam, if they could identify them as a particular government agent, there were many that were killed or put into prison camps. I mean, those people that were escaping had a right to be. One of the things that South Vietnam soldiers were doing was disrobing. Just they were running around the streets naked because they just took their uniforms off, because if they were caught with a uniform, I think they know what would have happened. But North Vietnam did become a country. I think it was a country that had a lot of economic problems until the point that they could establish trade with the United States again in the 90s. So it wasn't a successful country or great country to be in. I mean, I don't say that out of like, I know there's patriotic pride and things like that, or love for a country or great culture and food and things, but economically it wasn't even if you didn't have a political problem or weren't in a jail, you had problems living there.
One of the interesting things, people go back to, famously, John McCain goes back to his POW camp, or people go back to, my grandpa was in Okinawa. He never wanted to visit again, but people wanted to go. I just can't imagine that people are going to want to go back to Outpost Keating to like resolve something. There's just something about this war that is so fruitless, and that people are
soldiers. I think Bagram, for instance, when I heard that was captured, I know that's a very emotional point for a lot of them, because that's where they served and that's where the base was. Incidentally, it was also for the Soviets. So you get that was their air base, and then it became ours. And I did a whole podcast on the Soviet war in Afghanistan, which is a whole another story that could have had the same exact lesson about how long you stay in a war, like you had referenced earlier. The main thing is to get those casualties to zero. That's what America wants: peace, prosperity. They're connected. I believe they're connected. You did talk about, I think, when I got zapped off by the vicissitudes of the internet. You were talking a bit about there's like soldiers and generals maybe that kind of in the system and they want to just kind of get the rank. Like a war creates all of these perpetual forces, and that has to be watched. And so the part that I really have a good feeling about of Biden's decision is that he made it and that he's doubled down on it. He's as doubled down on his decision as Trump was on anything he ever did during his presidency. He's doing that. But yeah, I think you're going to look at with a fine-tooth comb now all of the planning and what happened and didn't happen and could it have been done better and all of those things. And those are going to be issues in the midterms in 2022. But the decision to go, the question you have to ask is, do we want another 20 years? In Vietnam, those same pressures were applied. The sentimentality of soldiers having fought for a cause and their lives, the lives of their friends and their own work and risk in vain is a strong and compelling argument in politics. You will see candidates running probably in the GOP in this case on that particular issue. The compilation of we have allies that stood up for the United States and we are not standing by them anymore. These are strong and powerful forces. They always have been. They were in South Vietnam. Ford thinks it was a great disgrace, President Ford, that he was not able to help South Vietnam more. These are powerful forces, but the Congress at that time, and I guess, Trump and Biden now made the call to make the decision they did. Trump might move away from it or not embrace it as much anymore, know that he's not president, but the reality is he took those steps and made that call. Otherwise, you could have done it in another 20 years. Easy.
Yeah.
Easy. Those forces are enough. We say, well, we got to stay in because we have friends here we have to support.
Well, with that, we're going to leave it there. It was a great conversation. It was great having you on the program today. Please make sure that you go check out My History Can Beat Up Your Politics. What are you working on now? What are you gonna have in the next few episodes?
The 1890s. It's going to be the Mauve Decade, probably a 2 or 3 parter on the 1890s, and what a decade of conflict, strife, and also some great literature.
All right. Well, My History Can Beat Up Your Politics. Check it out in any podcast app. Harry Reinhold, thanks for being here. Bruce Carlson, thanks for being here. And listener, thank you for being here. We will see you again on Monday. All right. Thanks, Bruce. We appreciate it.
Hey, thanks a lot. I really love doing it. Sorry for being late and all that.
Oh, no, you're fine. You're fine.
Yeah.
It worked out great.
Yeah, you used vicissitude in a sentence. That was impressive. It's rare for me to ever hear that word outside of dealing with a game. Being like, wow,
yeah, that's good. No, I'm glad to hear it. It just comes out. Some of this stuff just comes out. The thing writes itself. But no, it's really good to be on the show, and anytime we'll do it again.
All right, thanks, Bruce. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Hold on, let me type to the missus.
That's fine. We're still alive.
All right. It's moving day. Reagan is moving, so we'll knock this out. And
still says we're live.
No, I know we're live. Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah. I'm going to keep it in one big file, and then I'll just edit the videos as I go. So
okay, all right. Just want to make
so
sure
people can hang out and watch on Saturdays, but then it'll be I'll premiere it on 8 p.m. We have different videos.
It's like so this house for sale. I was watching them outside my window. Apparently, some people are going up there, very upset.
Why?
One, I want you to get it. 2, a bunch of white people are on it, and it's going to upset me because it's going to raise my property value up. I need black people to lower my property value, so my property tax will go down.
You want the whites? Are you saying the whites will lower your property value? Is that
Yeah,
what
No,
they'll go
raise it.
through here and start
they'll raise
and stuff. Okay,
happened to
job.
Harlan,
Next
right?
thing they'll know, they'll open up a Whole Foods. You know,
I'm gonna
property
I'm gonna
value.
pee real quick. I'll be right back.
That's fine. That's fine. You know, and as worse is that the house that's down, there's 3 houses down. My house is huge compared to this little house, right? This house is tiny, right? I've got even more land in this house, and it's sitting right there. And they are asking $75,000 more than I paid for mine. I'm like, oh dear God, no.
Yeah, just imagine what you could sell yours for now. That's why I was looking at the prices out here because it's the highest it's been. I was thinking about selling my place and only getting like, I got 40 acres. Yeah, it's becoming a pain to take care of. I'm getting older, and it's like, well, maybe I'll go buy a 2-acre land and get a nice house there and sell this for like $1 million, and then I can retire.
That's true. That's true. But it is 40 acres. You could just donate it to me, the 40 acres, and your reparations. I'll just clear that right off. No meal needed. I'll just take it.
It's just so much. I got so much to do out here. It's just.
Have you ever? Have you seen Clarkson's Farm? Jeremy Clarkson TV show about his farm.
Nope.
He's got a farm, and for years he paid someone to take care of it, but that guy retired, so he's like, I'm going to take care of it now. He's realizing how much work it is.
Now, I was gonna say when Bruce was on, but I didn't get a chance. But one of the last articles that I wrote was based off of one of his episodes where he was talking about Kent State, and I hadn't remembered about the day after when Nixon went out and talked to the protesters, because he was so distraught over the fact that these people had died, and it just showed to me that he at least we could say all we want about presidents and certain presidents and how they think and what they did, and but most of them did things because they felt something. They felt like some humanity. They were trying to help people. I disagree with what they did, but at least their mind was on a motive that was in their minds right. And that's why I had the issue with Trump, was that he did not have that mindset. He's just in for himself, so he didn't care.
Is that the newest sponsor, Spangle?
If you're not using the earwax, the Clinier earwax cleaners, you can get them at CVS too. They're a little expensive, like little silicone things that you like put it. Oh, you have no idea how good it feels. Because it's not like Q-tips, which pushes it back. It like gently scratches the inside of your ear. Like if I were stuck on a desert island with one thing, if I could take one thing to a desert island, it might be the ear cleaner, the ear scratcher.
I would take
we need something like that for those for sinuses.
All right, you know,
if we had something like that for sinuses,
yes. Oh,
it's called a neti pot.
Let's try.
Neti pots are okay, but
it's got like a little scoop,
like just a hard scratch when you want it in there.
Just a scoop internal. That's just nasty. Anyways, like we usually just
you're gonna get this video blocked on YouTube, right?
I know YouTube. This is,
All right, I'm gonna check this message from the boss. All right, you guys ready? Here we go.
Well, we're going back at it.
If you don't want to hang for this one, you don't have to. I only planned on doing 2, but him being late kind of threw us off. So, but I got to do this episode, so I have the notes done. But if you don't want to, I'm not gonna be mad at you.
It's fine. It's just like it's afternoon and like I can't hear Ruby like.
No, go ahead, Harry. It's fine.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm not mad at all because we ended up, getting thrown off.
All right, then I'm gonna jump off, guys. I'm sorry.
All right, bye.
All right, wait.
I guess you love me more, Reinhold. If you have to go, it's totally okay.
I have less to do with my life. I just sit around waiting for somebody to want to talk to me once in a while.
All right, here we go. Hope you meet him someday. No, I'm just kidding.
All right, let's get back to some boring subjects.
Understand the risk to our country.
Freedom brings people together.
You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network, Learn more at wearelibertarians.com.
Welcome back to the Chris Spangle Show. It is so great to be with you today here on a Tuesday. We haven't been on a Tuesday in a long time, but it's nice to be back. Hope you're enjoying the extra content, the extra episodes. Not really less, just breaking it up a little bit. And just trying to, I don't know what I'm doing. What am I doing with my life? Oh, this is the intro. Oh, I need to say goodbye. So stay tuned. We're going to talk about Afghanistan. I'm lost. Should I redo it? Nope, we're just going to keep going. Stay tuned. The show will get better.
Good live.
Warning.
Fix them first.
This show is for adults by semi-adults, so the language is sometimes strong and offensive.
I should just restart. I didn't even record. Harry's right. Okay.
All right, let's get back to some boring subjects.
Understand the risk to our country.
Freedom brings people together.
You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Learn more at wearelibertarians.com.
Welcome back to the Chris Spangle Show. Thank you for joining us here on a Tuesday. First Tuesday in a very long time. Thank you for being with us. We're going to talk about the Afghan withdrawal. Joe Biden promised to be the most competent president of all time. And we'll just add that to his list of lies, and you'll hear why after we come back from these words.
Warning. This show is for adults by semi-adults, so the language is sometimes strong and offensive.
I don't know what I said.
Welcome to the Chris Spangle Show. Our goal is to help you sound smarter while talking to your friends. If you struggle to understand politics, we explain it from an independent libertarian point of view. With all of the irreverence it deserves, we toss out the screaming heads, put people before political parties, and give context to the news to make you think. Now, here's our host, Chris Spangle, a 15-year veteran of politics and media.
Thanks for joining us here on the Chris Spangle Show. It is great to be with you. Before we start, we want to thank all of our members of Wall Plus on our Patreon. Join wallplus.com to sign up. You can get all kinds of great benefits like commercial-free shows, the entire back catalog, 1,000 more episodes. You want to go back and listen to any of the old network shows like Creating Maya or Storytime with Gina. Most of you don't even know what that is. Well, you can listen to it, much to my embarrassment. But we want to thank our $100 a month wall patrons, John Pasillo, Casey Feldposh, Lars Nordskog, Jake Edel, Matthew Durbin, Reinhold, Christy Avery, and Jason Doolittle. Thank you so much for making all of this possible. You are beloved, and we thank you so much. We are going to be talking about Afghanistan and the Afghan withdrawal and Joe Biden. We covered yesterday the history of the lead up to all of this. Now we are going to talk about the what happened in the last month and where do we go from here. Joining me is Reinhold. Harry had to jump off. He had to do dad stuff. We're recording these on Saturday. You can watch the live stream 10:15 in the morning. Check in with us. That's Eastern. Watch the live stream, and then you'll hear them on Monday and Tuesdays. So, Reinhold, this... I mean, when you look back, where we last left off was just the incompetence of the Afghan government, but you knew it would be a collapse when we left. Like, I think everybody knew that that was going to be the case, that when we left and weren't propping up the government, and Obama wanted to leave but never left, Trump came in and, to his credit, introduced and legitimized a strain of non-interventionist thinking, or at least that's towards that sentiment, I guess I would say, in the Republican Party. And I've been pleasantly surprised to see that that's kind of held up over the last week, because anti-leftism in a lot of ways is more powerful than non-interventionism in the Trump folks. So were they going to become war hawks again just to get Joe Biden? Maybe, but I've seen a lot of people kind of stick with their guns and say, we've got to leave. It's time to leave. But this could have been done differently. And that's definitely where I come down on it. I don't know about you. I mean, it was time to leave. Joe Biden was exactly right. We needed to leave. But when you look at, we'll examine on Friday how we left Vietnam, it's wildly different. This was zero planning. I mean, it's mystifying how we got to this place where there was zero planning for this.
Well, I don't know if there was zero planning. I think we're going to find that information out later. Because I don't think we knew that about Vietnam at the time, right? So it probably took several years to get all the information and find out what really went on behind the scenes. So, you know, as far as we know, that they could have had all these great plans in place and were able to get a bunch of people out, or it could have been a massive failure that nobody knew what was going on. I don't know if we even know that information yet. It's
Yeah,
just
but
kinda
doesn't
too
it make,
early.
you know, normally when one side messes up, there are allies that kind of go, yeah, but there's these things, there's these underreported stories. This has been universally like nobody is supporting Joe Biden. There's no Joe Biden cult. Like, you know, when Trump said he could shoot somebody on 53rd Street and he'd still get away with it, like it doesn't matter what Trump did. Like the whitewashing of the Trump administration that's been going on over these last few months is hilarious. Like, you know, Donald, this would have never happened under Donald Trump. What? You know,
Exactly what happened under Donald Trump, because he's the one that planned it.
yeah, I mean, partially. We'll kind of talk about that. We've got great notes from Sam Schultz. Check out our show notes. But I don't think he would have been more competent. But I don't think Joe Biden could have been more incompetent. I mean, at this point, there's nobody out there saying, yeah, like in Vietnam, when we got 150,000 people out before the fall of Saigon, we're not missing 150,000 people here.
No, and I think a lot of people are more concerned too, because we did get a lot of the people we wanted to get out. I mean, we got our people out and that sort of thing. And in Vietnam, we were able to, I think we got out a certain number, and then including the people who got out on their own was around 150,000, right? So I don't know what numbers are for this pullout. I don't think we have that yet, but as far as it being time to get out, I think it was time to get out 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Or 17 years ago, right? So because of the fact that we never really had full control of Afghanistan, Taliban always existed, you know, it was inevitable that we were going to have this problem when we left. We should have looked at history and seen the last time we tried to pull out of this situation and saw what the result was.
And everybody knows the
And
pull-out method is not that effective. No, the reality is
not
that,
100%.
right. So there's a fundamental moment that I didn't mention yesterday where there's a choice that the Bush administration faces early on, where they can stay in Tora Bora, dig in, and get bin Laden because he's in a cave, or they can go to Kabul to take over the country and topple the Taliban. And they chose to topple the Taliban instead of our mission, which was destroy Al-Qaeda and bring bin Laden to justice. And they decided to go for nation building instead. I mean, this was from that choice, from that moment on, it was the fruit of the poisonous tree. That this was always going to end in the Taliban retaking the country, because we, you know, in the movie The Outpost, they talk about death breeds death. The more war that happens in Afghanistan, the more children that get killed, the more people that, the more collateral damage, in the cold way to put it, there is, the more you recruit for the other side. And so it's just been a strengthening of the Taliban from the entire, you know, for the last 18 years at least. It was always going to end this way. So to have it topple in a week, like if your capital, like, it says something how poorly the last 20 years went, and the $800 billion we spent on this war, and the 6,000 American soldiers, and the tens of thousands of Afghan lives that have been lost in this, that you can take a capital in a week by driving up and knocking on the door like it's a DoorDash delivery. You know, that tells you that you never really built infrastructure. You never really built a military. You never really had won Afghanistan to begin with. And it wasn't a war we lost. We never even got close to winning it.
Right. So the problem with war is that you can take and hold land if you have the military power and you stay there and you just keep policing it. You can control it. But until you change the minds of the people who live in that area, they're always going to push back. And when you walk away, they're going to rebel against you. They're going to take over. They're going to get out from under the thumb that you're presenting to them. We weren't asked to be there. We weren't there humanitarianly. We weren't there to help these people. We went there and we destroyed their lives, and we targeted innocents for years with drone strikes and everything else. There's stories about how many innocent people were killed from drone strikes and from bombings that we would even admit happened.
By the way, we only know that because of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, and all of the whistleblowers should be pardoned immediately.
Of course, yeah. I mean,
they're the ones who are going to face charges, not the people that just wasted $1 trillion and killed 6,000 Americans and multiple people. They're not going to face any justice. They're going to be put in charge of the COVID pandemic. These effective geniuses that just like Joe Biden couldn't engineer a war, let alone a pandemic response. Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. Like all these famous stories, infamous stories of us killing 15 people at a wedding with a drone, all that did was just continually, Afghanistan's not Iraq, right? Afghanistan is a very mountainous region with a ton of different disparate tribal groups with allegiances to other major powers like Iran or Pakistan or India, or Iraq had some measure of wealth and infrastructure and cities and civilization, right? Like the majority of Afghans live a subsistence farming existence. You grow what you're going to eat that day, and they played the Taliban and the American military against each other for payments. But at the end of the day, their allegiance was always going to be to the people that they sort of knew and share cultures with. So you're right. The idea that we are going to change their hearts and minds was just sort of foolish from the beginning.
Well, look what happened with Iraq too. We pulled out of there, and now Iran is halfway running the place.
Right.
So it's not like, we left Iraq in a great position either. It's not something we do very well. We don't go in and really nation build well, right? We try to do the colonization thing, and we just don't do it. Look what we do to our own territories. We don't take care of Puerto Rico, and we don't take care of all the other places we own that aren't technically states and have representation in our government. They're subjects to us, as it were, right? So what we've done in South America and Central America, Honduras, and so many things that you can point back to. I mean, we kind of started talking about how kind of Iraq, the first Gulf War, kind of turned into 9/11 because we kept bases in Saudi Arabia, which was their Mecca, right? But going before that, what happened in Iran, and that happened because of what we did because of oil in the 50s, and which happened because of you just keep going back further and further, and it's just like somebody has to one day just say stop it,
right,
and let them figure out how they want that area to be. They're the ones living there. Let them self-govern, and we just never have let them do that.
Yeah, these poor farmers
put up a big show.
I mean, in the valleys that exist in Afghanistan, in the middle of these major mountains with no real roads, there's no connectivity, right? Like, I don't know, it's just such a fool's errand, and so that brings us to kind of what happened. So. Again, our show notes are available in a PDF form, got all kinds of book recommendations and video recommendations, movie recommendations, as well as an outline of what happened. So you can go and check that out so you can get the information quickly if you want to talk with your friends about all this and sound smart and you don't quite remember what we said in one of these episodes, then we've got it all there for you. We really don't see ourselves as the people that can explain this fully, but also just mainly guides, like trying to help you to think better in this world. So on August 15th, the Taliban captured the Afghan capital, which is Kabul, and declared the Afghan war over. So over the last 20 years, we have spent more than $83 billion training, equipping, and developing the Afghan National Army, their police, their air force, and special forces, and a group of people carrying light weapons that all collapsed in a day. So how does that happen? So we've had to go and redeploy troops now to go and try to not really secure the position, but secure enough escape routes for the people that we need to get out of there. We have about 15,000 American citizens there. The Pentagon and the White House, Pentagon says 5 to 10,000. White House says about 12,000. The fact that the American government has no idea how many American citizens are left in Afghanistan that might want to leave is truly shocking to me, let alone the other 18,000 translators and other personnel that help the American military over the last 20 years. They are scrambling. They have absolutely no path to get out of the country. We're given no opportunity to get that organized, get that together. So you've got tens of thousands of people that were just kind of blindsided by this collapsing so quickly. And so now we're redeploying troops to get there. So one commander says, no, David Brennan of Newsweek wrote, excuse me, the Taliban did not fight their way into Kabul. They drove in. They were commuters in American cities who found it harder driving to work the next day. The American flight from Kabul will be a stain on President Joe Biden's legacy and stand as a monument to American foreign policy hubris. After 2 decades, trillions of dollars, and hundreds of thousands of deaths, the Taliban are back in charge. So let's save the politics stuff for the last up, but remind me to ask you about like where does this stand for Joe Biden and like, I mean, I guess we'll do it now so I won't forget, but I heard Jonah Goldberg say that this was one of the greatest foreign policy blunders in American history, not just of the last few years, but the fact that this ended in a way that was so haphazard. Not the withdrawal itself, even though he was in favor of not fully withdrawing, not letting them collapse, but the blunder itself has major consequences moving forward. I mean, where historically would you put this as a blunder, Reinhold?
I would probably put this as a grade C blunder. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that I've seen, especially foreign policy wise. And one thing kind of we noted, and when we talked about this in the My History Can Beat Up Your Politics podcast about this, was that Ford, when he had his Saigon moment, right? Because he was the one that actually implemented that leaving Vietnam. It didn't even hardly touch him. There was nobody talking about that when we were having the election in 76 with Carter. I mean, that was a year later, and we weren't, nobody was hitting him on that. They were talking about Watergate. They were talking about how he pardoned Watergate and Nixon and let him get away with all the stuff that he did. Which, parallel wise, if you look at that way, would Biden not going after Trump for some of the things that Trump did, is that going to be more important than this? I think this fades a lot faster than I think people were going to realize, because at least we're out. There's not going to be any more deaths over there. We're not going to have any more. It's not going to be on the news every day like we have with Afghanistan. We still had to keep talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. Once this is over, there's going to be 20 other things that are going to happen.
How many people just kind of forgot that we were still there and in a war? Mm-hmm. I mean, don't worry. If you're sad about this, you won't think about it in 2 weeks, because we have the privilege of living in America. I mean, it's hold on. I'm going to troll Darla. You want to watch me troll Darla? So Darla writes, Jonah Goldberg is a joke. He's a neocon who still cries about Trump. I honestly think, Darla, that Jonah Goldberg's more libertarian than Michael Heiss. All right, let's see what she says. That'll be good. So, yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it, Reinhold. So how did it collapse so quickly? We will tell you when we come back from this break. Oh, what a good transition. Stay tuned for more like it. Welcome back to the Chris Spangle Show. We are so glad to have you with us. Those of you on the live stream on Saturday mornings, or those of you listening later. Thanks for joining us. So how did everything collapse so quickly here in Afghanistan? Well, they started nibbling around the edges. The Taliban controlled most of the rural areas. They just didn't have the cities. And they started eating around the edges with individual outposts in rural areas. And they were basically like fighting against soldiers who were starving and had low ammunition, and police units were surrounded by the Taliban fighters. And they promised safe passage if they surrendered and left behind their equipment, slowly giving the insurgents more and more control of roads and entire districts. So in early May, a Taliban commander telephoned Muhammad Jalal, a tribal elder in northern Afghanistan, and asked him to deliver a message to Afghan government troops at several bases in his district. If they do not surrender, we will kill them. He and other tribal elders complied. After several rounds of negotiations, 2 government bases and 3 outposts surrendered without a fight. Okay, so why May? In early May, we have to go back to the Doha Agreement and the agreement that Donald Trump made with the Taliban, because we don't fully understand what is happening here if we don't understand what's going on with the Doha Agreement. So Donald Trump was always in favor of leaving Afghanistan. It's one of the best things about him and his administration is that he really pushed this. And so kind of jumping back to that Doha Agreement so we can fully understand what that is, and I'm trying to organize myself. What was the Doha Agreement? The provisions of the deal include the withdrawal of all American and NATO troops from Afghanistan, a Taliban pledge to prevent al-Qaeda from operating in areas under Taliban control, and talks between the Taliban and Afghan government. This is from Wikipedia. The United States agreed to an initial reduction of its force levels from 13,000 to 8,600 by July 2020. 13,000 troops were in Afghanistan, right? Is that because Donald Trump was the great non-interventionist hope? No, it's because he, I think, was it quadrupled troop levels?
I think troop levels when he left office were about the same as they were when he entered office.
Yes, the great anti-war president Barack Obama had his own surge at the beginning of his presidency as well. So NATO pledged to bring down their numbers from 12,000 to 12,000 from 16,000. The United States also committed to closing 5 military bases within 130 days and to end economic sanctions in 2020. Now, that increased the amount of fighting, and one of the bloodiest weeks in Afghanistan happened in June of 2020. 291 members of the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces were killed, and 550 were wounded. So, everybody wanted to send in more troops, and they did not. So, you couldn't really finalize the deal until you got the Afghani government to figure out their structure of government. And so in May, the president of Afghanistan, signed a power sharing deal with Abdullah, his rival. And then the Afghan government had released 5,100 prisoners, and the Taliban had released 1,000 prisoners. So to set the scene, you basically have this agreement signed by the administration that they're going to leave by May of this year. And when Joe Biden gets elected, he extends that and says, I'm going to honor the deal, but I want a little bit more time. And the Afghans said time is up. And so they started going through in early May and threatening the different outposts and military bases around the country. And each surrender, large or small, handed the Taliban more weapons and vehicles, and vitally more control over the roads and highways, giving insurgents freedom to move rapidly and collect the next surrenders as the security forces were progressively cut off from ammunition, fuel, food, and salaries, right? So you're reducing American troops, you're reducing American control and policing, you're reducing and as you're doing that, you're reducing the effectiveness of the Afghan security forces. You're releasing all of these prisoners, which swells the ranks of the Taliban. So as we're decreasing our forces, they're increasing theirs, and they start nibbling away at the edges. And the Afghan troops were then consolidated to defend Afghanistan's 34 provincial capitals. So they stopped trying to protect the little outposts and villages. They started protecting capitals. And the Taliban started attacking the cities because they had locked up the rural areas earlier this year. Now, that strategy proved futile as insurgent fighters overran city after city, capturing around half of Afghanistan's provincial capitals in a week, encircling Kabul. So the Taliban expanded their control among the country's 400-odd districts from 77 on April 13 to 104 on June 16th to 223 on August 3rd. So out of 400 districts, they controlled 223 by August 3rd. Now, part of the reason that the government and the military collapsed is due to the widespread corruption. The defense and interior ministries, where funds, ammunition, and other equipment are sold on the black market, eventually ended up in the hands of the Taliban. So as we're sending military weaponry, I think it's insane that we left everything behind when we left. We'll talk about that in a moment, but they were already picking that stuff up. It's like when the Taliban or when ISIS was driving brand new Toyota trucks. It's because we just left that stuff behind. And as the other forces that we were supporting surrendered, the Taliban would get better equipment, which makes sense. As you're starting to gain control, you're starting to gain equipment. So some commanders in the Afghan security forces embezzled money by submitting fund requests for the salaries of ghost soldiers. As this was happening, the security forces personnel were kept unpaid and retained on duty without permission to leave. So your soldiers in Afghanistan aren't being paid, which is a recipe in every war ever fought in all of history for them to abandon the cause. The security forces had one of the highest desertion and casualty rates in the world. The per month attrition rate was 5,000, while recruitment was 300 to 500. So now you have unpaid soldiers who are starving without ammunition, being cut off from relief supplies, while the lavish lifestyles of their commanders were often too much. And instead of fighting and dying, they preferred to save their lives by surrendering to the Taliban for their amnesty offers. All of that is perfectly reasonable, rational if you're an Afghan security forces member. Now, on the front line in the southern Afghan city of Kandahar, a cardboard box of potatoes was supposed to pass as a police unit's daily rations. They hadn't received anything other than potatoes in various form in several days, and their hunger and fatigue wore them down. Quote, "These French fries are not going to hold these front lines," a police officer yelled, disgusted by the lack of support they're receiving in the country's second largest city. There was also no ideological cohesion with the army or a sense of national duty, because this isn't a country. This is a country drawn by the British or the French or some colonial power pretending that this is a country. And this is why the entire African and Middle East and Eurasia basically are a mess. No Afghan soldier was ready to fight and die to defend President Ashraf Ghani or the government. This environment of doubt and suspicion further undermined Afghan soldiers' resolve to resist the advance of ideologically cohesive Taliban. So, whenever you're in a political argument and the other person has the power of ideology and you don't, it's a little hard, right, Reinhold? So when fighters are driven by a desire to establish an Islamic emirate and drive out foreign troops they saw as occupiers, it became attractive to a lot of the security forces. Now, as we said last time, the Taliban arose out of 94. The group was rooted in rural areas of Kandahar province in the south. Now going back to the Doha agreement, in February, Donald Trump signed in February 2020, he signed a deal with the Taliban that promised to pull all the troops out of the country by May 1st of this year. Roughly 2,500 troops had remained in Afghanistan when Biden took office. And this is one of the problems with what Darla would call the deep state, or just the military-industrial complex, which is not a conspiracy theory. It was in the look at the exit address, the farewell address by Dwight D. Eisenhower, as he talked about warning people. We've built all these companies and all these armaments and all of these mechanisms for war, for World War II. You have to get rid of this, because if you don't, we will be in forever wars to feed these people and keep these industries alive. No president, no lawmaker is going to want to shrink an industry that employs hundreds of thousands of people, and the industry is killing people. If you look at the radio stations in Washington, D.C., they're largely funded by Northrop Grumman. You know, the think tanks that push all of this ideology are funded by Raytheon. They're funded by these companies that sell weaponry, that sell armaments, that sell parts for tanks. They advertise on the local TV stations. You have to remember that there is an economic gain for continuing these wars. And those contractors, those, you know, in Afghanistan, they didn't, during Afghanistan and Iraq under Bush, they didn't want to increase troop levels because it looked bad. So they hired private contractors. And so Eric Prince became a paramilitary organization with his organization, for instance. And so you're building all of this infrastructure that needs to be fed, that needs dollars. And I heard one soldier, it was The Political Orphanage is a great podcast by a libertarian leaning comedian named Andrew Heaton. And he had a soldier on who was a researcher for Glenn Beck. And he was just basically saying, like, when I was there and a soldier in Afghanistan, you cannot comprehend the amount of waste that went into this. You watch a movie like The Outpost and you see a brand new $200,000 Caterpillar, you know, what are the front loading shovel? You know, that's in every one of these dozens of outposts around the country, right? Like the amount of money that goes into war is incredibly attractive to politicians who want jobs in their district. And so, you know, it was a great thing that Donald Trump wanted to get us out and had the balls to say to all of these people, we're doing it. Didn't take, you know, and said, we're leaving and started to withdraw. But it pissed off the military. It pissed off those contractors. It pissed off the people who rule Washington with those dollars. And they ignored him in a lot of ways. The people who were profiting from the forever war and the people who were earning those bonuses that Harry talked about in Friday's show didn't want to follow through on this. And so the plans were not top tier planning, right? Like in Vietnam. And this is a lot of what we talked about, right? Reinhold, like the erosion of norms are not good, right? When Mike Pence calls on January 6th, the National Guard to come save them, and has no political or governmental or legal or judicial authority to do so, right? He's just a citizen at that point, basically, and undermining the president of the United States. Those norms that get broken don't get put back in place, you know? And so one of the consequences of the Donald Trump administration, whether it's good or bad, is that the military started to ignore the commander in chief. Well, that doesn't end well.
I think the military has been ignoring the commander in chief for a long time before Trump, but it became much more apparent, and it wasn't as obvious then. They weren't so blatant about it at the time, right? So, I mean, what do? You have to get people to understand why this is an issue. You have to get people to stop wanting to inflict our will on other countries and other people. We have enough problems trying to convince people to not want to inflict their will on their neighbors, let alone some foreign country where it's easier to just say, oh, those people are different. Their culture is different. They don't think like we do, you know? And then you start getting into groupthink and us versus them and all kinds of thought processes that smart politicians will use to manipulate you through emotions in order to keep gaining political power over you. And this is the inevitable result of that, you know, and people can complain about it, but we are the ones who help make this happen because we keep putting up with it for so many decades.
Yeah. Darla says, oh no, not the norms, anything but that. The norm that the civilians have control of their military is a really good norm you want to keep. If you don't agree with me, you don't understand history. Like that doesn't end well when the military and the civilian government, that connection gets broken. So, you know, and that's on the military for not obeying the president, even if the president was as erratic and wild as Donald Trump. Like, it doesn't matter. He was president. You've got to do what he says. So when Joe Biden comes in, that continues. They don't plan for an exit. They just sort of hope that they can talk him out of it because he's not Trump. And Joe Biden, to his credit, is very resolute. And it's a very good thing that he's resolute about leaving Afghanistan. And when the president gives the military the order to exit Afghanistan, they should have plans like we had in Vietnam as we exited that. So
I just before you go on, I will give credit to both Trump and Biden for two different things. Biden, I give credit for at least sticking to his guns and saying, we are leaving. We're not doing this anymore. This is wrong. We are going to leave. Now, what he didn't do, in my opinion, was make sure that we had a good strategy and exit plan to get out, right? The problem there is that he has been so involved in government and the military and Council of Foreign Relations and all that stuff. He should have been able to identify if they had a good plan or not. Trump, I'll give him credit for the fact that he was, new to that environment. So he was easily more snowed, right? So the generals would tell him all kinds of things and he would go, okay, that's fine. Because he's easier to convince.
Who's the Jim Mattis? He quit over Afghanistan. Like, remember that. Like he didn't want to follow through on the withdrawal. And he said, I think this is going to be a disaster and I'm not going to be a part of it. So I quit. So he quit as defense secretary over Afghanistan because he wouldn't preside over it. Okay, good. See ya.
And Bolton argued about it for a long time too, and ended up getting himself fired for that.
People have been wrong about this the entire every step of the way, right? Like, get rid of them. So Biden didn't reverse course when he became president. He did push back the withdrawal to September and later shifted it to August 31st. Why August 31st? Because he said it on September 11th. I cannot tell you how much of a propaganda victory it was for the Islamic extremists that we're going to exit on September 11th, 2021, the 20th anniversary. Oh, we lost. And somebody pointed that out to Clueless Joe. Oh, maybe, but we'll make it August 31st. But the Taliban said May. This is the agreement we had. So they started their offensive in May. Trump, he criticized Biden. Afghanistan is the most embarrassing military outcome in history. It didn't have to be that way. Can anyone imagine taking our military before evacuating civilians and other who have been good to our country? I can only do it for a few sentences. And who should be allowed to seek refuge? So basically, he's saying,
Trump about who should seek refuge to our country from foreign.
What he is saying is, can anyone imagine taking out our military before evacuating civilians and others who have been good to our country and who should be allowed to seek refuge? Okay, yeah, you're right. I would think you weren't saving the military first, but he said the opposite. Trump added in a separate statement, in addition, these people left top flight and highly sophisticated equipment. Who can believe such incompetence? Under my administrations, all civilians and equipment would have been removed. All right, first sentence, totally agree with. Second, okay, non-falsifiable. But he's exactly right. I mean, I saw that they're now considering bombing all of the equipment that they left. And I wish I had not closed this tab, but it's a little too late. Like, why didn't you blow up all that stuff before? Instead of the Chinese have already declared the Taliban basically that they're the legitimate government.
I think the thought process was you were leaving it for the government to defend itself when you pulled out. And since they just didn't want to exist, they didn't, everybody just laid down their arms and walked away from it because they knew that we weren't going to be there to cover their butts anymore. I just don't think that anybody thought that was going to happen. That these people were just going to defect, like they, exactly what happened in Vietnam. A lot of soldiers in South Vietnam just started defecting because they knew that they didn't have that nobody had their back anymore. And they couldn't do it on their own, so they just gave up.
Yeah, I mean, here's the Taliban American Ford, American weapons, American costume. The shoes I think are on the wrong feet, but like I don't know why you leave that much equipment for if Joe Biden feels that the Chinese are the greatest threat to liberty and believe me, every statement that Joe Biden makes about China, you need to think through the lens of Joe Biden setting up a global conflict with China, right? And you have to remember what Robert Gates said. Joe Biden has been wrong about every major foreign policy decision for 40 years. Gates isn't right either, but he's not wrong about Joe Biden, right? So if you really think that China is this great threat, why leave your equipment so they can then just blueprint that stuff out? Like why leave 18,000 translators? You have a moral duty. If you went to this country, and here's part of the story that we didn't talk about in the first, and I don't think we tell ourselves this story anymore, Reinhold, but like the story that we told ourselves before and during the 9/11 period was that we are the most moral country. As a baby Republican, I would say, when we took over and after we won World War II, we rebuilt the world and we didn't take over anyone's stuff. We rebuilt them back. But look at Japan. That idea that we are a moral good when we go to war was very important to the psychology of that period. So it's a fundamental violation that we're leaving these people behind. But I do buy on to, if you broke it, you buy it. You've made these people targets. You have a moral duty to bring these people back, to plan to bring them back.
We do, but you understand how all of that you just said was propaganda that didn't really exist, right?
Why?
That we went and didn't break countries, and we've destroyed so many countries and made them terrible situations, including some of the things we did to Japan. We didn't let them have a military for 40 years, or something like that. It's something more. They wanted us out for so long. I mean, I've talked to people who live in Japan, and they tell me, that it's what we get told about certain things is just not the reality on the ground.
In what way?
And just in the way that, how do you explain it? We're getting when we get our news, we're getting U.S. centric, make the United States look not horrible. I mean, there are some journalists who will go and try to find the bad things that we do, but they don't focus on the really repugnant things that we do.
Right.
Take a look at what we did. Like I said, banana republics from the Honduras and all the way through for the last 150 years, we have done the exact opposite of what we were supposed to do in this country. And we engaged in foreign entanglements and tried to nation build. It was one of the things when Bush was elected in 2000, he ran on the notion that we were not going to do any nation building. Right. And if 9/11 doesn't happen, maybe he follows through on that. I don't know. But as soon as 9/11, what's that?
They hate us for our freedom.
No, they hate us because we destroy their countries and we make their lives miserable.
We really need to do some episodes on the propaganda from that era, because it's truly amazing that like this villager in the middle of the mountains of Afghanistan who thinks that the American troops that just showed up are Russians because he hasn't heard that 20 years before the Russians had left, that they hate us for our freedom, so we need to bomb them. And it just,
they don't know who we are.
Right. They didn't hate us for our freedoms. They hated us because of our policies. And I think it was Scott Horton. I was watching somebody, but as I was prepping for the show, and they were basically saying like, there's trade-offs to everything. And I think this is the thing that people need to think about. There's trade-offs to every policy decision. There's trade-offs to every action, right? Joe Biden had a choice, and he says this in his speech. I had a choice to, they had left me with a choice. There was bare bones, 2,500 people, barely enough to support the country. I could leave or I could do a surge, and I chose to leave. And that's why this fell apart. Now, the buck stops with me. And then he went on to blame the Afghan people. He blamed Trump. He blamed everybody but him. But the buck stops with him. It was truly a masterful. I saw hardcore libertarian, non-interventionist, That was a good speech. And there were aspects of it that were good. It was so good, it almost made me forget that he had decided to leave tens of thousands of people to be slaughtered by the Taliban because of his incompetence. But everything's a trade-off, right? So you can stay in Afghanistan and prop that up, or you can leave. There's going to be a choice to make, right? I forget what the point that I was going to make, but you can lock everybody in their house, but there's trade-offs. Suicides are going to spike, jobs are going to be lost, businesses are going to close, and then if that doesn't work, then the government generally says, let's do that even harder, because we just didn't go far enough, right? Afghanistan, the military, these are all trade-offs. So you may be able to go and start a war in Iraq, so they fight them over there instead of fighting them here. But the reality is the policy didn't work. Look at San Bernardino's. Look at the Orlando shooting. Look at the Tsarnaev brothers in Boston. These are terrorist attacks. The Tsarnaev brothers said that their motivation was the Afghan war, right? So at a certain point, the policies that were enacted didn't work. It backfired. It made things worse. So the problem with the American government, the problem with most governments, is that they never look at this and go, yeah, maybe we should change course and do the opposite of what we used to think. They double down and they do more of it. And so I will give Joe Biden credit that who was in support of the invasion of Afghanistan, saying we made a mistake, let's get out of this. He deserves credit for that. But I just think that the way that this happened was just ridiculous.
It was. And I don't think, I mean, you remember Rumsfeld, that was his whole reason why he didn't want to get out of Iraq for almost 8 years, was because he didn't want to have it look bad when we left and things collapsed behind us, right? He wanted to leave a stronger country in our wake, but that's just never happens. It's just not how it works, because you can't, until you change the minds of the people, like I said before, until you change the thought processes and the minds of the people. As soon as you leave and you're not controlling them anymore, they're not going to defend themselves or like you, because they're going to look for someone else to help to protect them and defend them, right? They don't want to be left to the wolves.
We made them dependent on us, and so they never grew strong. And this is the problem with government. It makes you dependent on them. And then when that fails, you are left holding the bag, not them. Which major political figure in the last 30 years has gone to jail for their bad decisions in the 2008 financial crisis and the January 6th insurrections and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq? Like, where are the consequences for people that work in government? There aren't any. You can go and do in government whatever you want it to do, and you walk away with a fat book contract and a speaking gig at a think tank, that pays you $200,000. Hillary Clinton doesn't get, put in jail for things like Libya. She gets a book contract out of it. And that's the problem with growing the size and the scope of government in general, is that it's never truly held accountable. You are left holding the bag. You must resist any sort of dependence on the state in any way. And the way to a free society is through working with other people. It's self-aspirate, right? Like self-actualization and self-government. You wake up every day, you think about what you want to do and what you're passionate about, and you build work that is meaningful, like we talked about last week. And then you work with other people on work that they find meaningful. And so when we go into these other countries and we start telling the Taliban or the Afghans, like, we're going to build you a school and you need to send your kids to do this or that, and they're not in a position where they can do that because they're subsistence farmers trying to grow the food they're going to eat that day, it doesn't work. And so the school gets abandoned. There's so many stories out of Afghanistan in this war where, we waste, and the overages are unbelievable on building something like a school in Afghanistan. The Afghan officials, the American officials, they all take a picture in front of the school. We leave, and then 2 months later, it's abandoned. Nobody's using it.
Just like hundreds and hundreds and thousands of places in the United States too. It just doesn't work, right?
Instead of saying, like, we're going to trade with you on things that you actually want and use economics and trading and capitalism to get you to where you want to be, we come in with guns and say, here's your new school, take this money or else.
Well, that's what we did with Russia, So Russia, we kind of bankrupted, but for the most part, a lot of what led to that being a possibility was the decades of trying to commercial into them, right? Getting the McDonald's in there. They wanted the blue jeans. They wanted some of the American culture because they saw in Berlin and West Berlin and East Berlin, the East Berliners would see that. That's why they put the Berlin Wall up, because they didn't want the East Berlin people to see the experience that the West Berliners were having, because those ideas permeate and they can help bring people out of those types of environments, but you can't force it on them, right? Even though we did kind of force it on them in a way by, Radio Free Europe and pushing, all this propaganda into there, but they chose to listen to it, right? It wasn't like we were there with guns in our hands telling them they had to be free like we are. It's kind of hard to point a gun at somebody and tell them that you're there to make them free, and you're gonna make them do it, right? But it's a flaw that all the isms have, and I'm just having a big anti-isms kick lately. Is that they just don't understand? They don't accept human nature, and human nature isn't I want to be free. It's I want to be safe and live my life. Right. I want to be free, but within the confines of being protected. If you take most Americans and you drop them into Afghanistan and make them live there, they will, I think they would collapse and be incoherent, because there's nobody taking care of them. They have to worry about everything that they don't have to worry about, because we have an infrastructure built that kind of helps, protect us from other people's bad ideas. There are going to be bad actors. You have to have some protections up. So it's not understanding that, how people think and how they want to live and what their human nature is. It's a Pollyannic view that once we do this will happen. And it never works out that way.
Darla says, it's brave of Reinhold to wear a shower curtain for the entire internet to see. Oh, Darla. That was
At least
good.
I'm wearing something.
Yeah, Darla's probably, I don't know if Darla is a man or if writes as a man, has a female's name, but I guarantee they're in their mom's basement. No, we always appreciate Darla as the voice of the opposition in the comments. But yes, all right. Final thoughts for this. Let's wrap this up. It's moving day for my fiance, so I'm getting furious texts that I said I latest I'll be is 1. She knows better. So go ahead, Reinhold. Final thoughts about Afghanistan.
Final thoughts Afghanistan. I am just glad we're out. I don't want us to go back. If it's equipment that we're worried about, that stuff can be easily bought on the black market anyway. We're not saving anything if we
blow it up,
rid of it. Even if we blow it up, we're not really, who cares at that point? It's not like we're leaving them equipment, nuclear bombs or anything. Just let it go and finally put it in our past so we can look forward to a future where we're not killing people daily.
I agree. Nice. And I would only add to that the governor of Guam, an American, fiefdom. I don't know what we call it. A state that doesn't get any rights has basically said, like, take out anybody that wants to come, bring them to Guam. We will host them. We will care for them. We want them here until you can process everybody and figure out what to do with them. Take them up on the offer. Get people out who want to get out. Avoid a refugee crisis of 1.2 million people has been estimated. So yeah, I love that idea. So Darla says, I live in Savannah, Georgia, Chris, not in a basement. I love Savannah. It's a beautiful town. All right, everybody. So much for joining us here on the Chris Spangle Show. We appreciate it. Tomorrow is Wednesday, which means it's podcasting day, where I'm teaching you how to start your own podcast or talk about communication and how to like really get your message out there. So Stay tuned for that tomorrow. Thursday's Liberty Explained, and Friday is History Day. Bruce Carlson from My History Will Beat Up Your Politics podcast is joining us to talk about the Saigon comparisons. It was a great episode. We've already recorded it due to the magic of time shifting. So really enjoyable. So thanks to Bruce for coming on. Thank you, Reinhold, for being here. And thank you, listeners. If you got value out of this, please share with your friends. Say, hey, there's a podcast out there that makes me think they're not trying to piss you off. They're just trying to help you understand what's going on in the world. And maybe we'll slowly convert them to libertarianism. And then they can live in their mom's basement in Savannah, Georgia. So, all right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We will see you again next week or tomorrow. All these changes, I can't get used to it.